Chapter 385. Puff, that expert of 100 barbarians' cave spouted blood from his mouth. The fragment of his soul inside the iron dart had been crushed by Yishuan. Then, a golden ray of light arrived in front of his face. He couldn't do anything but watch its approach. He didn't have strength equal to that of Yishuan. In the end, his head exploded with a bang. This was a terrifying melee warfare. The 100 Barbarians' Cave and Fire Cloud Cave had countless years-old enmity. Both the sides were resorting to the use deadly means. Even their leaders weren't holding back. The two of them clamored as they rushed up into the sky and began to fight. Yang Hong and Yang Na were in a similar state. The hatred had taken deep root inside them as well. Bang! 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 Yishuan was shuttling back and forth while everyone was indulged in battle, just like a golden flash. These people were certainly the experts of Legendary's great complete realm, but they weren't his match. Yishuan had deliberately restrained his own strength since he didn't possess any hatred or enmity towards the hidden barbarian's cave. Anyway, he didn't desire to work himself to death for the Fire Cloud Cave. Ha ha ha, I didn't expect this place to be so lively. A wild laughter sounded from a distant place in the middle of this battle of life or death. A group of people could be seen approaching them from afar. They trod on rainbow lights. This was another team of barbarian people. The experts of the Fire Cloud Cave and the 100 Barbarians' Cave stopped fighting as they watched these new people approach. It was as if they had a prior tacit understanding or something. They didn't want the third party to benefit from their fight. These newcomers weren't inferior to the experts of the Fire Cloud Cave and the 100 Barbarian Cave. All of them were experts of Legendary's great complete realm. They were headed by a man who was approximately 30 years old. He was tall and had rough facial features. His nose was crooked like an eagle's beak. This gave his face a sinister look. A giant black divine eagle had spread out its wings. It was more than 10 meters tall, and was circling around him. A trace of sage-level power was overflowing from his body. It was obvious that he was an expert of semi-sage realm. The warriors of the Eagle Cave? How the hell did they arrive here? Yang Hong cursed. Yishuan recalled about the Eagle Cave from the memories of their disciples he had earlier killed. The Eagle Cave was also a major force of the southern wasteland. Strength-wise, it was no less than any of the other two caves. But, the most troublesome thing about them was that each disciple of the Eagle Cave used an ominous eagle beast as their mount. In fact, they grew up with their eagle beast. These Eagle Cave disciples were considered as formidable enemies because of the powerful tag team they formed with their pet eagles. These eagles were often very powerful as well. Shi Jiming's complexion turned ugly as he flew down from the sky. Clearly, the battle between Pan Shui Rong and him couldn't reach a conclusion. He was very confident that his cultivation would increase dramatically once he had obtained the sunflower water essence. Then, he'd be able to suppress his arch-rival Pan Shui Rong. However, the new leak hadn't only attracted Pan Shui Rong, but also a senior semi-sage expert of Eagle Cave, named Ng De Ng Das cultivation was nearly equal to that of the other two. However, he possessed about 200 principles within his body. He was very difficult to deal with. Moreover, his mount that black divine eagle was also at semi-sage realm. The molten iron pond started to seem very small as the three giant forces gathered around it. The place seemed packed. However, no one among the three parties took the initiative to begin. Everyone was afraid that the last standing party would benefit from the conflict between the first two. Moreover, the sunflower water essence hadn't appeared yet. Therefore, the three forces were waiting with patience. The surface of the pond was tranquil. Slowly, the curtain of night descended. The sunlight was replaced by the moonlight. The moonlight seemed to be gently caressing the earth. The sound of an internal turbulence started to reverberate from the pond. Everyone knew that the sunflower water essence was about to appear. They knew that it was going to take birth with some spiritual wisdom. That sunflower water essence could become a terrifying force in the future if could have a chance to absorb the essence of the sun and the moon for thousands of years. However, these experts wouldn't let it. Ripples appeared on the water surface. Everyone held their breath. They didn't dare to make any noise since they didn't wish to scare away the sunflower water essence. Soon, a group of azure-colored water bubbles emerged from the cold pond, and took a human form before everyone's eyes. Everyone was spellbound by the peculiar azure color of its body. It was exuding an incredibly beautiful radiance. "Begin!" It was hard to tell who shouted from the crowd, but several hundred experts immediately rushed forward to grab the sunflower water essence. Everyone wanted to capture the sunflower water essence. They couldn't think of anything else in this moment. Greed had prevailed over everyone. Yi Shiwen didn't move. He quietly changed his stature once again. His height had increased significantly. His facial features had turned even rougher. He quietly circled behind everyone. So many people were competing for that sunflower water essence. Moreover, there were 4 experts of semi-sage realm on the scene, including Ingda and his eagle. How could he get the opportunity to grab that sunflower water essence before everyone? Bang! A shocking water column emerged from the tranquil pond. It went straight up into the sky like a massive spear. The bulky column of water blotted out the sky, and fell towards the experts who were still in midair. Puff! 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 Several experts didn't get enough time to dodge, and the water column crashed into them. The terrifying force crushed them into fragments. Sad and shrill cries echoed throughout the entire Iron Pond Mountain in the peaceful night. Blood splashed everywhere in the air. In fact, it seemed like blood had rained from the sky. Who was it? Shi Jiming shouted as he unleashed the fire cloud's falling sky hand. His attack pressed down like a huge fire cloud. Bang! The entire water surface of the pond began to boil up. A seemingly endless amount of water vaporized in an instant. At this time, a huge shadow appeared from the middle of the pond. Meanwhile, the sunflower water essence was scared away by the battling experts, and submerged deep into the pond. Roar! Suddenly, that black shadowy figure let out a loud roar. It sounded similar to the roar of a dragon. Everyone's gazes finally pierced through dark curtain of night, and they saw who it really was. It was a wicked flood dragon of semi-sage realm. These so-called heavenly treasures were often guarded by all sorts of beasts. This sunflower water essence was being guarded by this flood dragon. The flood dragon must be waiting for this sunflower water essence to mature. It probably wanted to consume it for enhancing its cultivation further. The black scales of the flood dragon appeared ominous under the moonlight. They had frightened everyone. Its ice-cold eyes were like a pair of red lanterns, and were glaring at everyone. Yi Shiwen felt an abnormal and dangerous aura arising from the body of that flood dragon. This feeling was more intimidating compared to what he had felt when he had first seen Shi Jiming and other semi-sage experts. This inborn strange beast was undoubtedly catastrophic. It was very strong. In fact, it could be said that it was hard to find a match for this flood dragon. Its dragon power was overflowing everywhere. It was applying suppression force on everyone in the vicinity. Humans, get lost, the flood dragon revealed its mouthful of steel-like teeth and bellowed. A foul and fishy smell spread in the surroundings, and assaulted everyone's nostrils. It also unleashed its demonic energy in the surroundings. Dragons were supposed to be auspicious creatures according to the hearsay. However, there were evil dragons in this world as well, and flood dragons were widely known for their brutal and ferocious nature. I am guarding this sunflower water essence for 500 years now. So, you better get lost. Otherwise, it'll kill you all, the flood dragon roared as its huge body suddenly slammed against the pond's surface, and splashed countless water droplets in the air. The water droplets then fell down from the sky like raindrops. These water droplets were very heavy, and weighed up to several kilograms. The weight of falling water reached a horrifying extent when gathered together. Several weak warriors had their bodies smashed by the falling water, and sustained severe injuries. Everybody, it doesn't matter how we compete amongst ourselves. But, we mustn't lose to this beast. It will be best if we join hands to first kill this beast. Pan Shui Rong stepped forward and suggested. Everyone knew that this flood dragon was very powerful. They couldn't dare to fight head-on with it. It was clear that this flood dragon was also afraid of them teaming up against it. Otherwise, this fierce beast would have attacked and slaughtered them by now. Alright, let's join hands and kill this beast first. Ingda replied in agreement. Now, everyone's gazes turned towards Shi Jiming since they didn't know what head choose. Shi Jiming struggled a bit but finally made his decision. He nodded and agreed with the idea of forming a team to kill this flood dragon first. Attack, he shouted, and the fire clouds falling sky hand swept out from his body. It rushed out and pressed down upon that flood dragon. Pan Shui Rong and Ingda also shot various martial attacks towards the flood dragon. The flood dragon suddenly got furious. It had already taken into account that it wouldn't be able to contend against the combined force of these semi-sage experts. It knew that it wouldn't be able to slaughter them very easily if they joined hands. But, it hadn't expected that they'd collaborate to take it down. The flood dragon roared. It opened its big mouth, and spat an extremely cold breath. This breath froze everything in the surroundings, including the space. Then, the frozen space started to shatter, inch by inch. Bang! This cold breath attack and the attacks of other experts collided severely. The terrifying energy waves swept out in the surroundings. Yi Shiwen no longer hesitated, and restrained his breath. He stealthily retreated from that chaotic scene. Nobody spotted him doing so. Yi Shiwen carefully walked far away. Now, everyone looked like tiny dots from that distance. Then, he dived into the pond. He was suddenly struck by the piercing chill, and was left shiver uncontrollably. His entire body froze stiff, and sank down. Yi Shiwen secretly thought that this wasn't a good idea. It was much colder inside the pond than outside. He might get frozen to death if he stayed longer in the pond. Luckily, he had activated the resistance. Yi Shiwen had begun to operate his real elemental energy frantically at maximum output. Its output speed was getting faster and faster. Thanks to that, his complexion was gradually restored. His breathing went back to normal. The temperature in the pond was seriously terrible. And, the temperature fell by several degrees with every meter that he sank into the depths of the pond. Moreover, it was hard to determine how deep this pond was in reality. Yi Shiwen could faintly hear the fluctuations coming from the surface. These fluctuations had been caused by the battle that was taking place on the surface. However, that couldn't affect the state of water in the pond. Yi Shiwen realized that those fluctuations couldn't penetrate deeper into the pond, probably because of the heavy weight of water. He released his divine sense to look for the whereabouts of that sunflower water essence which had taken advantage of the sudden appearance of the flood dragon to escape deeper into the pond. It was very difficult for an average person to use their divine sense to search in this kind of an environment. However, it was a piece of cake for Yi Shiwen since he had wrapped his divine sense in divinities. Therefore, his divine sense could spread anywhere with an irresistible force. Eventually, Yi Ziwen's divine sense pinpointed the location of the sunflower water essence. A smile appeared on his face. He stretched out his big golden hand, and grabbed the sunflower water essence. Chapter 386. The sunflower water essence was constantly struggling in Yi Ziwen's hands. But, it could never break from Yi Ziwen's grasp. Yi Shiwen had control over it since he held it firmly. Yi Shiwen felt a trace of foreign soul inside that sunflower water essence. It probably belonged to that flood dragon. It must have put a fraction of its soul inside the sunflower water essence to locate it at any time. Yi Shiwen swallowed the sunflower water essence without any hesitation. He could feel the sunflower water essence dissolve within his body. The high-quality water essence gradually spread throughout his body, and repaired a few of his subtle internal injuries. The sunflower water essence itself possessed many principles. Its best function was that it could increase the number of principles inside one's body. The flood dragon was still outside the pond, but he became aware of this matter the moment it took place. It roared again and said, "Bastards! You tricked me by dragging me away from the sunflower water essence. You snatched it away in my absence." The flood dragon released a terrifying dragon breath to force open its way through the crowd of experts. Then, its huge body dived into the cold pond, paying no regards to the encirclement of those three forces. The flood dragon was extremely fierce. However, it wasn't a match for this joint force. The opposite party had 4 semi-sage realm experts. The wishes of these 4 semi-sage experts weren't aligned, but they could still inflict enormous pressure on the flood dragon since they were working together. In fact, they could even slay this flood dragon if they could manage to work together as a proper team. The soul of this flood dragon that was present inside the sunflower water essence had been crushed. This meant that it had fallen into someone's hands. The flood dragon had protected it for hundreds of years. How would he not act anxiously to get it back? The flood dragon set off endless water splashes as it dived into the pond. Everyone looked at each other. The flood dragon didn't seem to be acting or faking to them. Did something really happen? However, it didn't matter whether something had happened or not. It was vital to pursue the flood dragon one way or the other. Pursue it! Ingda roared. His divine eagle dived into the pond after him. Pan Shui Rong and Shi Jiming also dived into the pond. As far as others were concerned, they could only look at each other. They didn't dare to pursue that flood dragon into the pond. They would be frozen to death in the pond since they didn't have the support of the semi-sage principles. Even Yi Shiwen could survive in the pond because of his powerful gilded tyrant form only. The golden divinities had wrapped around him to protect him from the intense chill in the depths of the pond. Yi Shiwen felt that something was swimming down the pond. He guessed that it could be the flood dragon since its soul had been crushed by him. However, Yi Shiwen had already anticipated that. If its soul hadn't been crushed, the flood dragon would have come down by tracing its soul. So, Yi Shiwen had made the decision to crush the wisp of its soul, once and for all. Yi Shiwen digested the sunflower water essence, and felt that it had moistened his whole body. The biggest advantage of this was, his physical quality and aptitude would enhance significantly in the future. It was a rare treasure. Such treasures didn't grow often, even in 10,000 years. Yi Shiwen clenched his teeth, and proceeded to face the heavenly tribulation. He had enough strength now. He had planned that he'd look for a place to undergo closed-door training after he had killed Zhu Tianzong. Then, he'd be able to have a breakthrough into half-step legendary 9th stage. His fighting strength would reach semi-sage level in one fell swoop if that were to happen. He was confident that he could condense the principles of semi-sage level, especially after forming his own blood slave. However, he presently wasn't in a position to condense the semi-sage principles. So, he had begun to have a breakthrough on the spot. Damn it! You lay your hands on the sunflower water essence by taking the advantage of my absence, the flood dragon roared loudly as it rushed down. There was no living creature inside the entire pond, apart from Yi Shiwen. So, he was clearly visible to the flood dragon's eyes, just like a source of bright light in dark night. Puff, the flood dragon roared and spat its terrifying dragon breath. The exceptionally cold water posed no resistance to the dragon breath as it rushed forward. It froze the surrounding water in its path, and arrived in front of Yi Shiwen like a long spear with incomparable and frightening might. Kaboom! The ice-cold dragon breath didn't crash into Yi Shiwen's body as the flood dragon had expected. Instead, it was blocked by a blood-red figure that had suddenly appeared in front of Yi Shiwen. It was the blood slave that Yi Shiwen had previously condensed. The red blood exploded beneath the blood slave's feet, and propelled its body forward through the cold heavy water like a red arrow. The blood slave arrived beside that flood dragon, and launched an attack. The blood slave's fire cloud's sky-falling hand pressed down upon the flood dragon. Yi Shiwen had condensed this blood slave, and its soul was linked with Yi Shiwen. That's why, it could do anything that Yi Shiwen could. Yishuan had comprehended the fire cloud sky falling hand to a very high degree. And, the blood slave's attack wasn't one bit inferior to Yizaiwen's. And, the tyranny of this attack had increased countless times since the tyrannical power of semi-sage realm had been added to it. In fact, the blood slave's attack was several times more powerful than Yizaiwen's own. The fire cloud sky falling hand rumbled on the forehead of that flood dragon. It caused sparks, and a terrifying power began to boil on the flood dragon's body. Bang! The flood dragon's scales were blasted and peeled off by the blood slave's attack. Its scales fell off, and its blood started to gush out. Roar! The flood dragon had been wounded by a single palm attack by the blood slave. It began to scream in pain. Ingda, Pan Shui Rong, and Shi Jiming had also managed to dive to the pond's depth by now. They saw the flood dragon confronting the blood slave. They began to believe that the flood dragon had been right. Someone had secretly snatched away the sunflower water essence by taking the advantage of their fight outside the pond. The three of them immediately became angry. Ingda cursed out loud in anger, "Damn it! I was engaged in a life or death fight above, and you sneaked down here to steal the sunflower water essence. You bastard!" Unfortunately, the blood slave couldn't speak or think. It just coldly looked at everyone with a murderous look in its eyes. Bang! The fire cloud sky falling hand appeared again. It overwhelmingly spread out, and went towards those three experts to grab them. Fire cloud sky falling hand. The three experts immediately recognized the fire cloud sky falling hand. After all, it was the signature martial art move of the fire cloud cave. They couldn't possibly mistake it for something else. Shi Jiming was even more familiar with it than the others. "Who are you? How do you know the martial art of our fire cloud cave?" Shi Jiming became very depressed since the others had started to eye him in suspicion. He wouldn't have been this troubled if he had ordered one of his own to pull this off. But, he hadn't. Yet, there was no way to prove it otherwise since the martial arts of Fire Cloud Cave was too recognizable. "Damn it!" Shi Jiming shouted loudly, and shot the same fire cloud sky falling hand in reply. The two terrifying attacks ferociously collided. It appeared as if two gigantic fire clouds had clashed. Dreadful energy waves swept out in the surroundings, and displaced several gallons of heavy water in a flash. "You two also attack. Don't just stand stunned like that. This bastard isn't one of my men." Shi Jiming retreated several steps before he finally came to a halt. His huge body had been pushed back. He had fallen into a disadvantageous position when faced with the frightening force contained in his opponent's attack. The blood slave wasn't being cautious since it was condensed from a wisp of a star colossus soul. So, its body was bound to be extremely formidable and dreadful. Ingda and Pan Shui Rong eventually came back to their senses after hearing Shi Jiming's shout. They realized that this person might not be one of Shi Jiming's men in reality. They didn't hesitate any further, and rushed towards the blood slave. Meanwhile, the flood dragon rushed towards Yishuan since it had failed to deal with the blood slave. It could still feel the sunflower water essence's aura, and it was coming from Yizaiwen's body. "Damn you human! I will kill you! How dare you to steal my treasure!" The flood dragon spoke out of anger as it saw Yishuan sitting cross-legged. It had waited for 100 years for this sunflower water essence to mature, and Yishuan had stolen it. The flood dragon roared loudly. The black scales throughout its body, some covered in blood, ejaculated an incredible divine beam. It appeared as if the flood dragon was treading on the waves. It dashed towards Yishuan to kill him. Bang! The blood slave suddenly attacked from a distance even though he had been besieged by 3 attackers of his own. A long dragon went flying towards the flood dragon, and crashed into it. It was the coiling dragon palm. The flood dragon was injured, and spouted blood. It had been caught off guard by this long dragon. Roar! The flood dragon roared repeatedly. It tried to break free a few times, but was blocked by the blood slave every single time. The blood slave was under the siege of several semi-sage experts. However, it wasn't afraid. It was relying on the toughness of its body that was granted to it by the Star Colossus genes. It wasn't afraid of its flesh being torn off in a head-on combat. Anyway, it wasn't afraid of death since it was condensed from a soul, and was only a small fraction of the whole. Bang! The blood slave's body exploded and scattered. However, its body reorganized itself again. This was the most dreadful ability of the blood slave. It was immortal. It could continue to respawn as long as there were enough spirit dawn to support that. This was why the Devil King had condensed an army of blood slaves so that he could rule the devil world. And that was why Yi Shuan wanted to condense a blood slave. It could deal with the occasional enemies that he himself couldn't. The experts were very depressed at this sight. They couldn't do anything to defeat it. They had basically been tied down by the blood slave. They had no way out of there. Hence, they posed no danger to Yi Shuan even though he wasn't too far from there. However, Yi Shuan wouldn't allow the blood slave to face the enemies endlessly. The blood slave could certainly respawn as long as there were enough spirit dawn. However, Yi Shuan had to burn 50 million spirit dawn for merely condensing a blood slave of semi-sage realm. Therefore, he couldn't support the respawns of a blood slave several times with the leftover spirit dawn. Crash bang! The heavenly tribulation penetrated through the heavy water, and bombarded Yi Zaiwen's body. Chapter 387. Damn it! This bastard is crossing the tribulation. Everyone could clearly see that Yi Shuan was the real mastermind behind all this, and not the blood slave. He wasn't far away from them. He was clad in the warrior attire of the Fire Cloud Cave. Shi Jiming was particularly burning with anger since this person was clad in the attire of the Fire Cloud Cave. He must have mixed with the team of Fire Cloud Cave and followed Shi Jiming here. Shi Jiming couldn't tolerate the fact that he hadn't noticed that. Furthermore, he didn't even recognize this person. Yi Shuan had once again changed his appearance. Therefore, Shi Jiming didn't know that this person was Yi Shuan. Shi Jiming was preoccupied with rage since he was blaming himself for being negligent. Yi Shuan didn't know that someone was going mad because of him. Right now, he was sitting cross-legged, and could feel the power seething inside his body. The lightning in the sky struck again and again. The lighting rushed down, and appeared to be capable of seeing. It didn't spread out in the water, and aimed straight towards Yi Shuan to strike him. The lightning struck Yi Zaiwen's body and caused his real elemental energy to boil even more. However, he knew that it was just an appetizer. Waves and waves of numerous lightning figures crashed down from above before Yi Shuan could catch his breath. And they struck towards Yi Shuan. Shi Jiming, Pan Shui Rong, Ingda, and the Flood Dragon were present nearby. They were dumbstruck upon witnessing this scene. They couldn't help but think that the heaven was furious, and had sent its heavenly forces to render punishment. An ordinary heavenly tribulation was scary enough, let alone this variant of heavenly tribulation. An ordinary variant of heavenly tribulation was scary enough to kill an average expert. And this one was clearly an abnormal variant. These people hadn't heard about this kind of heavenly tribulation. Such an abnormal heavenly tribulation only existed in ancient books. Yet, now they were witnessing one with their own eyes. This was simply mind-boggling. The groups of lightning figures swept down from the sky. They appeared to be surfing on waves. They appeared extremely terrifying. These lightning figures rushed straight towards Yi Shuan like ferocious evil spirits. This was the type of heavenly tribulation everyone was afraid of. Because, facing a tribulation was like taking a test, and most people did that with inadequate preparation. Hence, they weren't capable enough to cross such a heavenly tribulation. Only an outstanding genius with deep foundation could cross it. For others, it was no different than a deadly tribulation. Yi Shuan might not have outstanding innate talent. However, his foundation was very profound. He had deliberately restrained his cultivation level over the past 2 years in order to build this deep foundation. Even so, Yi Shuwen didn't dare to look down on this heavenly tribulation one bit. He might suffer a crushing defeat if he were to take this terrifying heavenly tribulation lightly. Yi Shuwen sneered. He rushed up and burst into the crowd of lightning figures like a golden streamer of light. These lightning figures didn't constitute of just lightning apes. Various other kinds of demons were also present in this group. Some had taken human forms, but still retained several characteristics of the demon race. They rushed towards Yi Shuwen as they brandished their weapons. Die! Those lightning people bellowed loudly as they rushed towards Yi Shuwen. Each one of them was armed with sword, spears, clubs and all other sorts of weapons. The martial arts unleashed by these lightning people were far more tyrannical than the martial arts of the barbarian experts of Legendary's great complete realm. The lightning people formed small teams as they rushed towards Yi Shuwen to kill him. Each unit had enormous might. Yi Shuwen roared. A Han seal smashed down from above. The giant mountain fell from the sky like a huge dragon and smashed down. Many of the lightning people didn't get a chance to begin their attack, and were smashed by Yi Shuwen's Han seal. They transformed into a group of lightning energy, and were absorbed by Yi Shuwen. The universe inside Yi Shuwen's dantian made a crackling sound after it absorbed the lightning energy. Yi Shuwen, who now wore 5 layers of tyrant body technique, broke into the crowd of lightning people in one fell swoop and went all out. He shot the fire cloud's sky-falling hand, and didn't hold back one bit. His blazing big hand rushed forth like a bunch of red clouds, and grabbed a bunch of lightning people. They then got crushed and exploded. Shi Jiming's complexion turned ashen as he watched this scene from the sidelines. He knew that his comprehension of fire cloud's sky-falling hand was far inferior to Yi Shuwen's. Yet, somehow, this attack had reminded him of the attack that Yi Shuwen had displayed. However, this man was very different from Yi Shuwen, whether the comparison was drawn based on appearance, physical characteristics or aura. He could only blame his luck for encountering 2 experts whose comprehensions of the fire cloud sky-falling hand was superior to his own. And, he had encountered them within such a short time frame. However, he didn't hold himself back, and continued to attack the blood slave. He and the other semi-sage experts were no fools. They knew that the blood slave could respawn only to some extent, not limitlessly. Wouldn't taking endless rebirths go against the heaven's will? The blood slave was certainly operating by consuming some kind of energy. So, they only needed to exhaust it thoroughly. That would automatically bring an end to this fight. Moreover, this must be done before Yi Shuwen was done crossing the heavenly tribulation. Then, they could kill Yi Shuwen by taking advantage of his weak condition post-tribulation. A person who could cross such a dreadful heavenly tribulation had to be genuinely talented and intrepid. He couldn't be allowed to live. He would be exhausted after crossing this heavenly tribulation, and it would be their big chance to get rid of him. Bang! Ingda's divine eagle grabbed the blood slave in its claws and smashed it. Yi Shuwen couldn't see or hear them, but he knew their intentions. Both sides wanted to dispose of their respective opponents quickly. Yi Shuwen continued to slaughter those lightning people. Each of these lightning people was as strong as an expert of Legendary's great complete realm. However, they weren't a match for Yi Shuwen. It wouldn't be an overstatement to say that, it was rare to find an opponent of Yi Shuwen on the same level in the entire world. He was basically invincible on his level. Moreover, he possessed the formidable gilded tyrant form. That made him an even more tyrannical opponent. He rushed into the group of lightning people. He simply disregarded the lightning attacks being launched at him. He grabbed a lightning person with his hand, and crushed it. He then absorbed its energy. His strength increased a bit as a result. Yi Shuwen continued to become stronger. Moreover, he didn't stop here. Rather, he started doing 2 things at once. On one hand, he grabbed many lightning people and crushed them. On the other hand, he began to control his real elemental energy to capture the principles in his vicinity. He then started to condense them. He wasn't doing this for the first time. He had done this prior to condensing the blood slave. So, it was a child's play for him now. It was uncertain how many principles were captured by him. However, he managed to condense the first Tao principle inside his body. Bang! Yi Zaiwen's aura suddenly began to change after he condensed the first Tao principle. He finally experienced his first qualitative change. The innumerable changes in the past had only been quantitative in nature. It seemed as if an endless amount of water had finally broken through the dam. Yi Zaiwen's body began to entangle the coercion of Sage Realm. It was merely the coercion of semi-sage level. However, there was certainly a huge difference when compared to earlier. This was the beginning of his transcendence of mortal world, a mere step towards becoming a sage. Shi Jiming, Pan Shui Rong and Yingdo were in utter shock when they saw that Yi Xuan had begun to condense principles. They couldn't believe their eyes. They were quite convinced that Yi Xuan hadn't even reached half-step legendary 9th stage yet. Even the extremely profound experts of Legendary's great complete realm would face great difficulties in condensing principles. They themselves had experienced this in the past, and knew of the challenges that lay in the path. After all, they had also walked on the same path. The most shocking thing for them wasn't that Yi Xuan was condensing principles. Rather, the most shocking was the fact that he was doing it without even reaching half-step legendary 9th stage. Their eyes popped out as they watched this happen in front of them. They were blown away by this. There was always a certain relation between one's cultivation level and strength, but it wasn't absolute. Yi Xuan possessed the fighting strength of Legendary's great complete realm even though he was merely at half-step legendary 8th stage. Yet, this wasn't that surprising. However, condensing the principles of semi-sage realm at such a lower level was definitely equivalent to going against the heaven's will. The stages were like floors in a building. A person could see everything on the floor they were on. However, a person on the bottom floor would never understand the feeling of overlooking the earth from high up in the sky. Yi Xuan was clearly a person who had never left the ground. Yet, he seemed to know the feeling of overlooking the earth from the sky. Yi Zaiwen's actions and agility skill got imbued with fluctuating world principles as he condensed more and more of them. Now, each and every movement of his carried the power of the world. Those lightning people didn't stand a chance against him. He slapped the large group of lightning people with his fire cloud sky falling hand, and killed them all in one shot. As Yi Zaiwen's speed of annihilating the lightning people grew more and more, those semi-sage experts as well as the flood dragon became more and more anxious. That was because they were witnessing the birth of a miracle. Yi Xuan was unceasingly condensing the principles within his body. He quickly surpassed the preliminary stage of semi-sage realm by condensing 100 Tao principles. However, he continued. Soon, he had condensed 110, 120, and then, he finally crossed the 200 mark. Now, he had closed the gap between himself and these experts. However, they felt their hair standing on end when they saw Yi Xuan condense more principles after the 200 mark. To think that such a terrifying expert was present among them, one who could continuously comprehended more than 200 principles, and that too in one go. God only knows how much effort these people had to put to condense 200 principles. But Yi Xuan didn't stop. 220. 250. Hurry, let's get out of here. Shi Jiming shouted loudly. He couldn't bear the pressure on his heart, and turned around to escape. They'd end up dead if they waited until the full promotion of Yi Zaiwen's strength, since his power would have increased beyond their imagination by then. Not to mention that Yi Xuan would have the blood slave's support. The other few experts, as well as the flood dragon, turned around to escape after they heard Shi Jiming's shout. Want to run away? It's too late for that. A tyrannical aura which clearly surpassed the initial stage of semi-sage realm swept in the surroundings. Chapter 388. Want to run away? It's too late for that. A sneering sound came from Yi Zaiwen's mouth. His aura exploded and surged to an exceptionally terrifying extent. Yi Xuan had condensed about 300 Tao principles inside his body. Thanks to that, his fighting strength had reached the intermediate stage of semi-sage realm. As a result, he had enough fighting strength to stand against the experts who were at the peak of the initial stage of semi-sage realm. Yi Shiwen shot his fire cloud sky falling hand to stop those people from escaping. It formed a mysterious red cloud. It was a lot more exquisite than the one displayed by the blood slave. Yi Zaiwen's fire cloud sky falling hand had obtained enough energy and essence that it could easily split the mountains. His flaming hand advanced towards that divine eagle to grab it. The divine eagle couldn't evade Yi Zaiwen's attack even after putting all its effort. So, it screamed loudly as it attempted to counter the attack. Its golden wings began to emanate golden rays of light in the surroundings. Its wings flapped several times, and unleashed an overwhelming golden beam. The golden beam rushed forth to tackle Yi Zaiwen's fire cloud sky falling hand. Ingda naturally couldn't bear to see that his pet was going to be caught by Yi Shiwen. So, he quickly turned around and brandished his long blade. The blade energy shattered the space as it went towards Yi Zaiwen's attack. It collided with Yi Zaiwen's attack. It seemed as if a meteor had crashed into the earth. The terrifying power unleashed by the collision cracked the space open, inch by inch. Bang! 2 attacks of semi-sage realm had swept out in the surroundings at once. The energy released from the attacks pierced through the mountains and rivers as they crashed straight into Yi Zaiwen's fire cloud sky falling hand. The fire cloud sky falling hand vibrated frantically after it had faced the 2 terrifying attacks at once. Yi Shiwen coldly snorted and pumped more power into his attack. As a result, his blazing hands started to turn more and more golden in color. Ha! Yi Shiwen shouted loudly. He grabbed the golden beam and the blade energy simultaneously. They started to boil and seethe within the grasp of his fire cloud sky falling hand. Bang! The golden beam and the blame energy were crushed, and got annihilated. Then, the fire cloud sky falling hand advanced forward, and grabbed that divine eagle without any delay. Don't do it! Ingda roared. He released startling blade energy. It pierced its way through the heavy water and rushed towards the fire cloud sky falling hand to chop it down. However, it was too late. Bang! The giant stature of that divine eagle was ruptured because it was crushed by the fire cloud sky falling hand. It could only scream before its blood splashed out. In the end, it got turned into a mass of blood fog. No, you bastard! Ingda felt his heart shatter when he saw his several hundred-years-old companion getting crushed to death. His body turned into a streamer of light, and he suddenly arrived in front of Yi Shiwen to kill him. Buried sword secrets. Yi Shiwen let out a cold shout. He congealed a startling sword intention in his hand, and brandished it horizontally. The sword intention forged its way ahead. It appeared as if a long dragon was flying across the sky. Puchi! Ingda's blade energy got defeated by the sword intention. Then, his entire body was chopped down into pieces by the sword intention. He died on the spot. Pan Shui Rong, Shi Jiming, and that flood dragon were extremely frightened when they saw 2 semi-sage realm powerhouses being effortlessly slaughtered by Yi Shiwen. They rushed upward towards the water's surface with all their strength. How could Yi Shiwen let them escape? He had chosen to cross the heavenly tribulation in the water mainly because he would have had to face several hundred experts of Legendary's great complete realm along with these semi-sage experts if he had crossed it on the surface. So, how could he possibly allow them to escape? Yi Shiwen sent the blood slave to stop the flood dragon, while he personally chased after 100 barbarians' caves Pan Shui Rong to kill her. Pan Shui Rong panicked when she saw Yi Shiwen chase after her. She quickly turned around and pointed her fingers towards him. Her huge fingers extended towards Yi Shiwen, one by one. It seemed as if a god had descended into the mortal world to destroy it. The fingers shattered the space wherever they went. It seemed as if the world itself was about to disintegrate into pieces. Yi Shiwen immediately recognized this attack. It was a martial art of a small guarding faction of the 100 Barbarians' Cave. It was called 100 Barbarians' Lu Ren Fingers. Even a finger could break the world. It was said that this terrifying technique had emerged from the barbarian god's finger technique. It was also said that the barbarian god had once destroyed half of the world with this technique. Yi Shiwen shot his fire cloud sky falling hand once again. It struck those huge pointy fingers. The fingers simply weren't a match for the fire cloud sky falling hand. Bang! 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 The fire cloud sky falling hand grabbed those huge fingers, and exploded them. The power of the finger attack wasn't inferior to the power of fire cloud sky falling hand. However, Pan Shui Rong's skill was far less than Yi Ziwen's. Yi Shiwen had also learned the method of executing the 100 Barbarians' Lu Ren fingers from the memory of the deceased disciples of 100 Barbarians Cave. However, Yi Shiwen was dressed up as a disciple of the Fire Cloud Cave. So, he didn't display a power technique of the 100 Barbarians Cave. Pan Shui Rong's fingers were crushed by Yi Shiwen, one by one. She couldn't evade Yi Ziwen's attack, and got slaughtered. He plundered all her wealth from her corpse. Yi Shiwen didn't show her a shred of mercy even though she was a woman. Yi Shiwen rushed towards Shi Jiming after he had killed Pan Shui Rong. Shi Jiming had escaped towards the water surface by now. Shi Jiming convulsed with fear as he saw Yi Shiwen approach closer. He shouted, "No! You can't kill me. Otherwise, my father won't spare you. Your father won't find out about this." Yi Shiwen sneered. A Han seal fell from above like a huge dragon. It caught Shi Jiming off guard, smashed his body, and thrust him to the bottom of the pond. The bones in his body had been crushed. Generally, the barbarians had more robust bodies than the people of southern region. However, none were on par with Yi Shiwen. Bang! Yi Shiwen used fire cloud sky falling hand and slapped Shi Jiming to death. His body turned into a group of blood fog. Then, Yi Shiwen plundered his wealth as well. The wealth of these semi-sage experts was on an entirely different level when compared to that on the bodies of the experts of Legendary's Great Complete Realm, since they were considered as elites among elites in their respective martial arts schools. So, they were bound to have several treasures on their bodies. However, there were no spirit dawn on their bodies. Rather, they had possessed primary spirit dawn. A primary spirit Dan was refined from the spirit dawn. First, the spirit energy was extracted from the spirit dawn. It was then compressed to a great extent, and then further condensed to form primary spirit dawn. It was impossible for the experts below semi-sage realm to condense these high-quality dawn. It could be said that spirit energy was the smallest unit of energy which was accessible to the experts below semi-sage realm. Only those experts who had condensed the principles of semi-sage realm or above were capable of condensing primary spirit dawn. 10,000 spirit dawn were required to condense one primary spirit dan. The experts of semi-sage realm or higher used to deal in primary spirit dawn only. Otherwise, if they dealt in spirit dawn with each other, then the number of spirit dawn in an average transaction would reach astronomical figures. Yi Shiwen had obtained more than 20,000 primary spirit dawn from the bodies of these experts. It was a big fortune for him. The wealth of legendary experts was nothing in comparison to that of these semi-sage experts, that too when the comparison was drawn solely on the basis of primary spirit dawn, and not adding the other exotic treasures and magic weapons in their possession. Yi Shiwen rushed towards that flood dragon after he had killed Shi Jiming. He sneered since there was one around to interfere. The flood dragon collapsed under Yi Shiwen and the blood slave's pincer attack. However, Yi Shiwen didn't turn its corpse into blood fog. Instead, he left its corpse intact, and stored it in his stock. The flood dragon's entire body was covered with treasures. The dragon's blood could be used to nourish and harvest rare herbal medicines. Yi Shiwen began to operate the restraining breath technique after he had killed the flood dragon. And, his appearance transformed into that of Shi Jiming's. He sneered and received the blood slave back. Then, he rushed out of the deep and cold pond like a streamer of light. The disciples of all three forces were anxiously waiting at the shore of the pond. However, they hadn't dared to jump into the cold pond. A few impatient disciples had dived into the pond, but had been frozen to death. Diving into this pond was like committing suicide for an expert below the semi-sage realm. But Yi Shiwen was an exception, thanks to his gilded tyrant form. Moreover, the sudden arrival of the heavenly tribulation had scared them. The appearance of all types of lightning figures had terrified them even more. They hadn't come across such a terrifying heavenly tribulation in the past. Such an abnormal tribulation would appear only for a monster who had dared to go against the heavens' will. Otherwise, the heavens would never be so unfair as to send such a dreadful heavenly tribulation. That was because the one facing it would have little to no chance of survival. Forget about witnessing a tribulation like this one, they hadn't even heard about something like this. It was an extremely scary spectacle. They were very worried because they might have to face a one-sided massacre if their leader didn't win. Young Master Shi, several experts of the Fire Cloud Cave shouted in joy as they saw Yi Shiwen emerge from the pond. Yi Shiwen nodded blankly. He then said, "Let's get back to the Fire Cloud Cave." "Wait. Shi Jiming, where is our Miss Pan?" The warriors of the 100 Barbarians Cave didn't hold back. They blocked Yi Ziwen's path. "You guys are courting death. Do you want to meet her?" Yi Shiwen shouted coldly. His eyes flashed with killing intent as he continued to pretend being Shi Jiming. A fire cloud sky falling hand appeared, and swept towards them for the kill. The 100 Barbarians Cave and Fire Cloud Cave were mortal enemies. It was fairly natural for a deadly fight to break out between them. Bang! These experts of Legendary's great complete realm couldn't evade Yi Ziwen's attack. They were reduced to a mass of flesh and blood by Yi Shiwen. There was no comparison between Yi Ziwen's strength and theirs even before he had jumped into the pond. Let alone now, when he had condensed about 300 principles. Yi Shiwen killed them all in the blink of an eye. Over 200 warriors of 100 Barbarians Cave had been slaughtered. The experts of the Eagle Cave were shocked by this scene. They were deterred by this, and didn't dare to advance forward. Provoking this vicious fiend would be tantamount to courting death. Suddenly, a bad feeling emerged inside their hearts. Ingda should have arrived by now, if he was alive. But, he hadn't. On the contrary, Yi Shiwen had. This clearly meant that Shi Jiming had won the fight over the sunflower water essence, and Ingda must have died. They wouldn't dare to provoke Yi Shiwen for they didn't wish to face the same fate as their leader. Yi Shiwen didn't say anything since he saw the scared faces of the warriors of the Eagle Cave. They were basically speechless. He left with the other disciples of the Fire Cloud Cave. He spared the lives of the Eagle Cave warriors, and allowed them go so that they could spread the news that Shi Jiming had killed Pan Shui Rong. This would deepen the hatred between these two forces, and that would reduce the threat to the southern region. Chapter 389. The Fire Cloud Cave's main altar was located in a top-notch place in the southern wasteland. Countless experts of the Fire Cloud Cave were stationed there. The entire place was brimming with spiritual arteries that ran underground. Thanks to that, the Fire Cloud Cave's main altar was overflowing with spirit energy, and looked like a paradise in the mortal world. The main altar of the Fire Cloud Cave certainly wasn't on the level of the true Martial University. But, it was still a top-tier place of immortals. Yi Shiwen moved along with the disciples of the Fire Cloud Cave disguised as Shi Jiming. He then dismissed the team, and went inside the Fire Cloud Cave without any issues, all thanks to his disguise as the son of an elder of the Fire Cloud Cave. Shi Jiming enjoyed a good reputation in the younger generation of the Fire Cloud Cave. Yi Shiwen made his way into the Fire Cloud Cave without any problem by taking advantage of Shi Jiming's reputation. Shi Jiming was a core disciple of the Fire Cloud Cave. The eligibility for becoming a core disciple in the Fire Cloud Cave was same as it was inside the true Martial University. Only Sage Realm experts could be appointed as core disciples. However, Shi Jiming had managed to become a core disciple by taking advantage of his identity as the son of an elder. Yi Shiwen could use his identity as a core disciple to move about freely, and could do whatever he wanted, so long as true disciples didn't come into the picture. Shi Jiming had his own cave mansion inside the Fire Cloud Cave. Yi Shiwen went inside Shi Jiming's cave mansion, and asked one his trusted confidants to look for the whereabouts of Zhu Tianzong. Zhu Tianzong's matter was confidential. However, it was only so for the outsiders. Yi Zaiwen's present position was that of a core disciple of the Fire Cloud Cave. So, it should be a piece of cake for him to investigate this matter. Who would think that this person who had the appearance of Shi Jiming wasn't actually Shi Jiming, but Yi Shiwen? Yi Shiwen sat cross-legged, and was immediately surrounded by all sorts of principles he had condensed earlier. Yi Shiwen was doing his utmost to consolidate these principles. Yi Zaiwen's accumulation of energy was very deep. After all, he had deliberately suppressed his cultivation for over 2 years. And, it had now been unleashed, all at once. This was extremely terrifying. Yi Shiwen had condensed about 300 Tao principles. However, he knew that this was merely the beginning, nothing more. He could attain a complete qualitative change and become a sage expert only after he had condensed over 1,000 Tao principles. It wasn't very difficult to condense principles at this stage. The most important point was that the body must be capable of containing them. People with formidable bodies like that of Yi Shiwen would obviously reap great benefits for cheap. Only the experts of the intermediate stage of semi-sage realm were capable of condensing 300 Tao principles. However, Yi Shiwen had managed to pull it off nonetheless. He couldn't be taken lightly. In fact, he could instantly go past the 300 mark, so long as his body could become stronger. However, the danger related to this Zhu Tianzong matter had gone far beyond Yi Zaiwen's imagination. Shi Jiming, come out! Suddenly, a loud shout came from outside. Yi Shiwen had been seated calmly inside the cave mansion, and had been waiting for any news related to Zhu Tianzong. Yi Shiwen swept out his divine sense to probe the outside. He saw a 20-year-old man. He was clad in a tiger fur. His bronze-colored skin was glowing wildly. His eyes looked fierce, and it seemed as if he'd bite someone at the drop of a hat. He turned out to be a semi-sage expert. His intrepid aura was sweeping across the surroundings, it carried the presence of principles. 5 or 6 barbarian warriors were stationed behind him. Each of these individuals was an expert of Legendary's great complete realm. Their valiant aura made them seem very frightening. Yi Shiwen came out flying. He looked coldly at this young man. He had come to know this man from Shi Jiming's memory. This young man was named Ding Gaoyang. He was the son of another elder. He and Shi Jiming would often be entangled in small skirmishes. And, Shi Jiming had always failed to deal with him. Ding Gaoyang, what are you doing here? Yi Zaiwen's countenance was ice-cold as he asked. Humph. You really wish to die, don't you? You dared to send someone from your faction to look for Brother Zhu's whereabouts. Do you wish to die? Don't you know that Zhu Tianzong's whereabouts are a secret? Yet you're trying to find him. Ding Gaoyang replied coldly. Then, he grabbed a barbarian expert from behind, and threw him on the ground. That expert was Shi Jiming's confidant. But, he was already dead. Yi Shiwen frowned. Zhu Tianzong's matter was more complex than he had expected. Initially, he had anticipated that he could easily find Zhu Tianzong's whereabouts by taking the advantage of Shi Jiming's position. But, one simple investigation attempt had led to such a big development. Brother Zhu Tianzong is in the presence of His Majesty the Cave Lord. He has obtained a special permission to immerse himself in the flaming sun real water by the virtue of his great achievements. It shall help him to condense principles. Then, he would be able to attain the real body of the barbarian god. He will then have boundless future prospects. At that time, he may also become a member of my palace. And, you dared to send someone to track him down? Ding Gaoyang sneered. Not many people know that Brother Zhu was our undercover agent in the true martial university and he has now returned. But, you sent your man to track him in spite of knowing this? You are courting death. I suspect that you've secretly collaborated with the true Martial University. Just you wait. I will inform the elders. And then, you will die. Ding Gao Yang laughed out loud. He had finally gotten the opportunity to get rid of this old enemy of his. He hadn't expected that his arch-rival would be so foolish that he'd try to look for Zhu Tianzong's whereabouts. But, now he could get him killed by the hands of the elders. Condensing barbarian god's real body from flaming sun real water. Yi Shiwen instantly found the answer from Shi Jiming's memory. This flaming sun real water was an extraordinary and magical liquid. It was capable of enhancing one's physique to a great extent. Even Shi Jiming had only heard about it. He had never obtained the reward of accessing it. One could only obtain this reward if they were to make a massive contribution to the Fire Cloud Cave. Even then, one could only obtain a small vial of this magical liquid for consumption, but it was enough to enhance one's body significantly. However, Zhu Tianzong had gotten a chance to immerse his entire body in the flaming sun real water pond. How big a contribution towards the Fire Cloud Cave could get one such a reward? The practice method of the barbarian people was a bit similar to Yi Zaiwen's. Both aimed to infinitely strengthen their bodies. Yi Zaiwen's main objective was to practice the gilded tyrant form to the pinnacle. The barbarian people's main objective was to condense the real body of the barbarian god. However, the gilded tyrant form was different. The gilded tyrant form was achieved by strengthening the body to an extremely profound level. However, the real body of the barbarian god was itself a type of body, and was similar to the physique of the barbarian god, as mentioned in the legends. The southern barbarians practiced martial arts largely to transform their own body into the real body of the barbarian god. But, this process was very long. A majority of the barbarian people would give up midway since they couldn't attain the real body of the barbarian god. But, immersing oneself in the flaming sun real water could quicken this process. However, one needed to consume a great amount of the flaming sun real water to attain the real body of barbarian god. And, one could only get a small vial of this magical liquid even after they had made a massive contribution to the Fire Cloud Cave since they couldn't allow their disciples to squander this precious treasure. Their willingness to give such a reward to Zhu Tianzong after his return from the true Martial University clearly showed that he must have brought back some extraordinary intel. Now that you've come here, I won't let you leave. Yi Shiwen sneered. Ding Gao Yang had brought about his own destruction. Yi Shiwen was disguised as Shi Jiming. But, the higher authorities would make an investigation if they came to know about this matter. Then, how would Yi Shiwen be able to conceal the truth? Are you implying that you'll silence the witnesses? All by yourself? Ding Gao Yang looked disdainfully at Yi Shiwen and said. He knew this old rival very well. Both youngsters were on par with each other. Therefore, one couldn't do much about the other. Humph. Yi Shiwen sneered. The sound waves suddenly scattered and set off waves of energy. The energy waves swept out in the surroundings, and shattered the space wherever they went. Those experts of Legendary's great complete realm who had accompanied Ding Gao Yang were struck. They spouted blood as the bones throughout their bodies got crushed, their energy centers were severed. You have brought about your own doom. Do you think that you've obtained a rare opportunity to make some meritorious achievement? Yi Shiwen walked towards Ding Gao Yang, step by step. His imposing aura also increased, bit by bit. How can it be possible? How did you become so strong? Ding Gao Yang's pupils suddenly contracted. An expression of terror appeared on his face. He finally realized that his old enemy had become extremely powerful. In fact, he had effortlessly killed those experts of Legendary's great complete realm with the sound energy produced from just a humph. They knew each other very well. So, Ding Gao Yang was aware that it was impossible for Shi Jiming to achieve such a feat, but he didn't know what kind of a fortuitous adventure Shi Jiming had come across that had made him so terrifying. Go and ask the King of Hell. Yi Shiwen sneered. The fire cloud sky falling hand appeared to grab Ding Gao Yang. It was strong enough to overturn a mountain. How's this even possible? I can't believe this. Ding Gao Yang roared. He shot the same fire cloud sky falling hand towards Yi Shiwen. However, how could he be Yi Ziwen's opponent? His fire cloud sky falling hand was grabbed and exterminated by Yi Shiwen. He crushed it into small pieces, and then absorbed it. Then, Yi Ziwen's attack advanced forward. Bang! 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 Yi Ziwen's suppression exploded the defense-type magical weapons which had been protecting Ding Gao Yang's body. His protective layer of real elemental energy was also crushed by the suppression. Then, the fire cloud sky falling hand struck his body. Bang! Yi Ziwen's fire cloud sky falling hand grabbed him, and crushed his body. His body burst into a group of blood fog. Then, Yi Shiwen absorbed his soul and read his memory. Yi Shiwen came to know that he hadn't yet reported this matter to the higher authority. He wanted to humiliate his old enemy before he reported this matter to the higher authority. Yi Shiwen felt a bit relieved. Disguising as Shi Jiming had turned out to be a good deal. Now, finding Zhu Tianzong's whereabouts wouldn't be a big deal for him. After all, he was the son of an elder, and also a semi-sage expert. But, he didn't want an inspection to happen since his identity could be revealed if they were to investigate. Ding Gao Yang's memories revealed that Zhu Tianzong had already left for the Flaming Sun Real Pond. The pond was located in the depths of the Fire Cloud Cave. So, he must rush there to kill Zhu Tianzong. It would be more difficult to deal with him once he had attained the real body of the barbarian god. Yi Shiwen was about to leave, but, suddenly, the sky began to shake violently. It unexpectedly began to collapse into small pieces, bit by bit. Chapter 390. Badum 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 Badum. Suddenly, the sounds of the drum beats reverberated between the heaven and earth. Yi Shiwen came to know the meaning of this signal from the memories of the deceased disciples of Fire Cloud Cave. It was the Fire Cloud's Cave's signal to gather their experts in a time of crisis. This signal was only used in extremely urgent and critical situations. Crap! What is going on? Yi Mo looked towards the huge cracks that had started to appear in the sky and asked. Yi Shiwen had just flown out of this mountain range when a large number of experts flew past him. Move fast. Damn it. This can't be happening. How is this possible? Those bastards of the devil worship cult joined hands with the experts of the 100 Barbarians Cave. Aren't the experts of 100 Barbarians Cave afraid of facing the outrage and public indignation from the people of the true martial world? An expert bellowed. Damn it. They've already advanced towards the main altar. They must have found out that a lot of our experts aren't present here and have already left for the battlefront. Shit. They've certainly established a direct connection with the devil world. A group of formidable figures swept across from the sky. Experts of semi-sage realm, sage realm, and even unfathomable experts of great sage realm were present in the group. Each of these experts went flying away. Their tyrannical auras swept across in the surroundings. The tyrannical devil energy was also spread in all directions at the same time. Damn. The 100 Barbarian Cave was doing nothing but attracting our experts to the battlefront earlier. But, they wanted to launch their main attack from behind in reality. Yi Shiwen was also quite shocked by this. The Fire Cloud Cave was one of the superpowers that had stood erect in the true martial world for thousands of years. How was a major force like this just seeing its people massacred before its eyes? This was really a messed up situation. Every Sage Realm and Great Sage Realm expert of the Fire Cloud Cave immediately came outside. A startling conflict broke out between them, and the joint forces of the 100 Barbarians Cave and Devil Worship Cult. Yi Shiwen, this is a very good opportunity. A majority of the experts of the Fire Cloud Cave have gone out to fight. Now, it's the best chance to obtain Flaming Sun Real Water. Yi Mo shouted with excitement. The Flaming Sun Real Water is quite amazing. A treasure like that doesn't appear often, maybe once in countless years. Even a major force like the Fire Cloud Cave deems it as a priceless treasure. Your gilded tyrant form can have a breakthrough to the 6th layer if you can immerse your body in flaming sun real water. You will become invincible among the experts who are at the initial stage of semi-sage realm. Ha ha ha. One's body could obtain incredible benefits with the help of the nourishment from flaming sun real water. That was why it was considered the most precious reward by the people of Fire Cloud Cave. Moreover, you can take advantage of this chaos and kill Zhu Tianzong. Then, you can get out of Fire Cloud Cave once the mission is complete. Staying here is extremely dangerous. Yi Mo said. Yi Shiwen nodded. The fight between all the sage experts and great sage experts of Fire Cloud Cave, and the joint forces of 100 Barbarians Cave and Devil Worship Cult, was world-shaking. The space surrounding the Fire Cloud Cave had also started to collapse and shatter into small pieces. No one had expected that such a terrifying battle would break out. One mustn't forget that the Fire Cloud Cave was a colossus force just like the true Martial University. They knew how to protect their lair. They had locked the surrounding space, and had made it impossible to open a direct portal to the Devil World. Moreover, they had locked the space so tightly that the experts of below semi-sage realm couldn't break it. They could at most cause a minor damage in a radius of a few meters. The damaged part of the barrier would then restore itself immediately. However, even such an insanely strong spatial barrier had been smashed into pieces. Nobody had witnessed such a horrifying battle before, to the extent that its aftermath could scare a person to death. This kind of battle appeared like a mortal fight among immortals, even to someone like Yi Shiwen. His gilded tyrant form had been mastered to the 5th layer, but even that could disintegrate by a mere touch from the complementary waves that were being generated during this battle. Yi Shiwen certainly wasn't interested in taking part in this battle. Devil Worship Cult's name, as well as its existence, had annoyed the true martial world since the beginning. They were usually the reason behind any major chaos. A majority of devil experts of the Devil Worship Cult had spread everywhere like forest fire. Their main motive was to create chaos in the true martial world. And for that purpose they could form alliance with anyone. The more chaos they could create, the more beneficial it would be for them. That was because it would create the opportunity to establish the dominance of the devil world over the true martial world. Yi Shiwen decided to first kill Zhu Tianzong without worrying about anything else. And then, head plunder the flaming sun real water. Yi Shiwen was very powerful. He could be considered at the peak of the initial stage of semi-sage realm. But, his gilded tyrant form could smoothly reach the 6th layer if he could get his hands on the flaming sun real water. Consequently, his fighting strength would increase by leaps and bounds. A difference of heaven and earth would come into effect by this 1 layer's increment. Yi Shiwen restrained his breath, and quickly flew towards the flaming sun temple. The flaming sun real water was genuinely the most precious divine liquid of the Fire Cloud Cave. It was stored inside the flaming sun temple, which was situated in the depths of Fire Cloud Cave. Yi Shiwen was disguised as Shi Jiming, but he still couldn't approach it that easily even if he used his identity as an elder's son. But, the entire Fire Cloud Cave was in chaos right now. They had been at war with the 100 Barbarians Cave for so many years, but today's battle was unusual. There were often short skirmishes between them. Yet, they never went as far as to attack each other's nests since that could pose a threat to their entire existence. The entire Fire Cloud Cave was in mess. This was quite a heart-curdling spectacle. Yi Shiwen approached the flaming sun temple gradually. At this time, the Fire Cloud Cave no longer looked like the wonderland it used to be. It no longer had the immortal aura lingering in the air. Instead, the atmosphere was loaded with various kinds of vicious energy, ominous aura and devil energy. The spectacle seemed like something that would appear on Doomsday. Various kinds of roars and shrieks of devil experts could be heard. It seemed as if the barrier between this world and the devil world had been torn open, and a large number of various sorts of devils had barged into this world. Many disciples of Fire Cloud Cave were fighting with the devil experts. It seemed as if the entire territory of the Fire Cloud Cave had been encompassed in this tremendous battle. The Fire Cloud Cave wasn't prepared for this sudden enemy attack, in spite of fact that they had used several defense-type matrices. So, they had been forced to retreat by the allied forces of their enemies, little by little. They were being pushed inwards from the peripheral region. Several of their palaces had fallen into conflagration. Great numbers of disciples of the Fire Cloud Cave had been killed or swallowed by the devils. It was an exceptionally tragic spectacle, like a scene from purgatory itself. Yi Shiwen continued to fly towards his destination. On the way, he saw a large group of devils not far from him. Their strange laughter was proliferating everywhere, and sounded extremely scary. In fact, some of the experts of the 100 Barbarians Cave and devils had even made their way inside the main altar. There was no way to stop them because of their massive numerical strength. These experts were on a killing spree inside the altar. Yi Shiwen also came across some of these experts on his way. He didn't hold back, and killed these evildoers. Yi Shiwen didn't hold a good opinion of the devils anyway. He had been fighting against the devil race for a long time. Soon, Yi Shiwen arrived at the Flaming Sun Temple. This place was also somewhat chaotic, but not as worse as outside. At this time, a few disciples of Semi-Sage Realm arrived there. One of them shouted, "Stop! Who are you? This is an important place of the Fire Cloud Cave. No one is allowed to come here without the cave lord's permission." Yi Shiwen didn't act politely. He shot the Fire Cloud Sky Falling hand, and grabbed them all at once. Bang! 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 These semi-sage experts were no match for Yi Shiwen, and were insta-killed. They hadn't anticipated that one of their own would arrive here, and attack them in this manner. They had arrived here to protect the Flaming Sun Temple. They were naturally elites among elites. An ordinary expert of Semi-Sage Realm shouldn't have been their opponent. Even Shi Jiming might not have been their match. However, it was such a pity that they had come across Yi Shiwen. Yi Shiwen entered the temple without any hesitation. He saw a spacious and empty hall as soon as he went inside the temple. In the hall, he saw a pond whose perimeter was less than 100 meters. A red-colored liquid was boiling inside the pond. He sensed some kind of tyrannical energy seething inside the liquid. This was what Yi Shiwen was seeking for, the Flaming Sun Real Water. The Fire Cloud Cave had been accumulating this Flaming Sun Real Water since times immemorial. It was very hard to accumulate so much. One could accumulate only a bit of this magical liquid. And, that too after saving up for countless years. Yi Shiwen dived into the Flaming Sun Real Water. He felt incredible once he was in the water. The pores in his skin, and the capillaries in his body, immediately started to open up. He went all out, and started to absorb the Flaming Sun Real Water. This Flaming Sun Real Water possessed a strong concentration of the positive yang energy. This energy had been accumulated in abundance for countless years to form the Flaming Sun Real Water. Hence, it possessed endless power. Yi Shiwen felt the influx of a majestic power emerge inside his body as he absorbed the Flaming Sun Real Water. It was intensely hot. It burned his meridians as it circulated through them. The trace of a painful expression appeared on Yi Shiwen's face. An ordinary attack couldn't injure his body, thanks to his gilded tyrant form. Even his meridians were extremely strong. An ordinary energy shouldn't have been able to harm them. However, he felt as if his meridians were going to explode. But, he didn't dare to stop the absorption midway, and began to operate his gilded tyrant form in order to completely absorb this power. This power was different from the energies that Yi Shiwen had absorbed in the past. It had started to transform the structure of his body after it had drilling into it. Even his gilded tyrant form had begun to transform in some unknown direction. Yi Shiwen certainly knew that his body was soon going to transform into the real body of the barbarian god if he didn't do anything. He wouldn't have minded if he were a barbarian. Rather, a barbarian would have been extremely happy if that had happened. However, he was dead set on practicing his own version of body tempering technique. Therefore, he couldn't allow his body to transform into the real body of the barbarian god. He could only restrain the decomposition of flaming sun real water inside his body, and redirect it towards the nourishment of the sixth layer of tyrant body technique. Golden divine beams began to flicker frantically inside Yi Zaiwen's body. He began to operate his tyrant body technique at its best since he wanted it to have a breakthrough to the sixth layer. Bang! It was hard to tell after how long, but a terrifying aura broke out of his body. The tyrant body technique had finally been practiced to the sixth layer. Chapter 391. Yi Xuan had finished absorbing the flaming sun real water, and his gilded tyrant form had finally made the breakthrough to the sixth layer. His whole body was glittering and emitting golden rays of light. Red drops of water were gradually dripping from his golden body. Yi Xuan had felt as if his body was about to be torn apart once he started to absorb the flaming sun real water. He could feel his body transforming on a cellular level. He could feel his cells being torn open, and then reconstructed. Yi Xuan had suppressed the transformation of his body. After that, he had focused all the accumulated energy into reaching the sixth layer of gilded tyrant form. He had consumed only 1/10 of the flaming sun real water from the pond during this breakthrough. No wonder it was considered Fire Cloud Cave's most hidden and precious treasure. The big pond was full of flaming sun real water, but everyone wasn't allowed to use it. In fact, only 1 or 2 experts from a generation were allowed to use it to attain the real body of the barbarian god. Only a few people had the authority to use this magical liquid. But, the entire flaming sun real water had fallen into Yi Zaiwen's hands. It could be said that this was his biggest harvest on this mission. Now, he wouldn't have to face difficulties in having future breakthroughs, thanks to this flaming sun real water. Ha ha ha, Yi Xuan, you've developed quite a lot. And, the flaming sun real water has fallen into your hands. So, you won't have to face difficulties in perfecting the gilded tyrant form. Yi Mo laughed out loud. He couldn't have obtained this opportunity if it hadn't been for the sudden outbreak of this battle, and chaos that had ensued thereafter. In fact, he wouldn't have even thought about this impossible task. Who are you? A man's loud shout was heard. It came from outside the temple. He wasn't clad in the common barbarian attire. He was dressed up as a mediator of the southern region. He was clad in white clothes. He had thick eyebrows and big eyes. He looked different from other barbarians. Yi Xuan immediately recognized that person. He turned out to be his target, Zhu Tianzong. Yi Xuan stepped out from the flaming sun real pond. He laughed mischievously. Then, he looked at Zhu Tianzong and said, I am Yi Xuan. Nice to meet you, brother Zhu. Yi Xuan collected the remaining flaming sun real water from the pond as he said that. Zhu Tianzong's complexion suddenly changed. He said, You're Yi Xuan. Zhu Tianzong had obviously heard Yi Zaiwen's name. After all, Yi Xuan was very famous among this session's disciples. Zhu Tianzong had never seen him before, but he could tell that this guy was indeed Yi Xuan. It's impossible. I know everything about the people the true Martial University has sent after me. And, I know for sure that you're not one of them. Zhu Tianzong's complexion looked ugly as he said that. Yi Xuan realized that the Merit Elder had indeed been right. Zhu Tianzong had genuinely established a big information network during the many years he had spent in the Merit Palace Hall. Those people were sent only to attract Big Brother Zhu's attention. Yi Xuan spoke with a light smile on his face. It is I who will take your head. You want to kill me? You're very reckless. Zhu Tianzong sneered and said. I know that you're a Heaven's Pride level expert. But, you've brought about your own destruction by coming here. Ha, today I get to personally strangle a Heaven's Pride level expert. Zhu Tianzong burst into laughter. Then, his eyes turned fierce and revealed a somewhat cruel look. Zhu Tianzong sneered. His hands emitted majestic golden lights. This was his secret technique, Golden Cicada Sage Beheader. He appeared like the incarnation of a giant cicada god from ancient times. He streaked across the horizon as he flew forward. There were Tao principles wrapped around his body. He was an expert of the semi-sage realm. Yi Zaiwen's complexion remained unchanged. He knew that the Lord of the Fire Cloud Cave must have helped Zhu Tianzong with his practice. That was why his cultivation had increased so sharply within such a short time. The golden divinities began to surge within Yi Zaiwen's body. His hair was blown upwards. Yi Shiwen launched his counterattack. He didn't need to keep the disguise of a Fire Cloud Cave disciple in front of Zhu Tianzong. Suddenly, a dragon's roar reverberated. His palm's shadow covered the entire sky like dense rain clouds, and went towards Zhu Tianzong to grab him. Bang! Yi Zaiwen's palm shadow ferociously collided with the golden cicada's phantom image. The phantom image of golden cicada was torn to pieces, and scattered. Zhu Tianzong's real figure had been hidden behind it. It was revealed once again. Yi Zaiwen's figure suddenly rose up in the sky. He brandished his palm, and displayed the move Hidden Dragon Rises from the Abyss. Suddenly, a golden dragon rushed towards Zhu Tianzong, and struck him on his chest. Yi Zaiwen's coiling dragon palm had been practiced to an extremely profound level. Its power had also increased countless times after Yi Shiwen had deduced all its 9 moves. That golden dragon faced upwards, and let out a long and loud roar. Suddenly, this entire place seemed like the country of the dragons. Yi Shiwen had integrated everything he ever comprehended in this simple move. This one move could even rip apart the entire world. Zhu Tianzong was caught off guard. Yi Shiwen had already arrived in front of him. Zhu Tianzong had looked down on Yi Shiwen since he himself was a semi-sage expert. However, he had never thought that Yi Shiwen would turn out to be so terrifying. Yi Shiwen possessed the fighting strength of semi-sage realm. The might displayed by his move was on the level of semi-sage realm. Zhu Tianzong's golden cicada had been ripped apart in a flash. However, Zhu Tianzong wasn't an ordinary character either. He wouldn't have been sent undercover to the true martial university for so many years if he were an ordinary person. Great heaven-catching cover. Zhu Tianzong had learnt famous martial arts in the true martial university. His entire body was enveloped in a massive cover of iron. This cover shielded his body, there were no chinks in his cover. In fact, it seemed as if he had practiced this technique to the peak level. The same martial art could display different might in the hands of different people. And, the great heaven-catching cover had unleashed superb might when wielded by Zhu Tianzong. Some experts were able to fight a dozen experts of their level at once, even with their own strength suppressed. This entirely depended on the degree of one's understanding of martial arts. It depended on whether one's understanding was profound or not. Perhaps an ordinary expert of Legendary's great complete realm wouldn't be able to budge Zhu Tianzong's great heaven-catching cover. However, he had bumped into Yi Shiwen. Yi Zaiwen's innate talent might not be considered as top-notch. Yet, he was second to none in the younger generation, especially when it came to one's degree of understanding of martial arts and Tao principles. Bang! The golden dragon opened its strong claws, and grabbed Zhu Tianzong's iron cover. Suddenly, it seemed as if the world had lost its color. A loud sound of the collision of gold and iron resounded. The dragon's claws smashed the iron cover into pieces. After that, the golden dragon rushed towards Zhu Tianzong to grab him. Bang! The dragon's claws struck Zhu Tianzong. His body was sent flying upside down by the huge force. Bits of his flesh and blood splattered in all directions. Zhu Tianzong's body got knocked against a pillar inside the main hall, and finally came to a halt. Zhu Tianzong had been nearly struck to death by Yi Zaiwen's attack. There was a look of utter shock in his eyes. Yi Shiwen had become so terrifying that even a top individual who had especially been nurtured by the cave lord wasn't worthy of being his opponent. The divine power unleashed by his palm attack was enough to overwhelm the heaven. Zhu Tianzong's complexion turned pale. He had anticipated that he'd be able to run amok in the young generation once he had stepped into the semi-sage realm and had attained the real body of the barbarian god. However, he had never imagined that he'd come across a freak like Yi Shiwen. Yi Shiwen, you must know that you won't be able to get out of the fire cloud cave if you kill me. Zhu Tianzong spoke coldly as he clenched his teeth. His vitality had begun to gradually restore itself. His face had turned bright red. He was clearly using some type of healing technique to speed up the healing process of his injuries. But, this healing technique was far inferior to the Phoenix regeneration technique. Yi Ziwen's Phoenix regeneration technique healed very quickly at the very least. In fact, it was so fast that its speed couldn't be tracked by an average person. Yi Shiwen didn't seem to care about Zhu Tianzong's unusual threat. So, he walked towards him step by step. Die! Zhu Tianzong roared loudly. His entire body transformed into a giant golden cicada and rushed towards Yi Shiwen to kill him. It was rumored that this huge golden cicada had once slaughtered a devil god in the ancient times. Yi Shiwen transformed into a golden streamer of light and rushed towards Zhu Tianzong. A fight broke out between the two. Bang! Their attacks were extremely terrifying and quick. The golden cicada and the golden dragon collided ferociously, and began to strangle each other to death. Their collisions unleashed a burst of endless divine beams. These beams spread out and cracked the surrounding space into small pieces. The temple was made up of some unknown yet hard stone. But, it couldn't withstand the impact of such horrifying attacks, and collapsed into pieces. The flaming sun real water was a precious treasure of the fire cloud cave. So, the sudden collapse of the flaming sun temple immediately attracted the attention of several powerhouses. Yi Shiwen, you can't delay any further. The experts of the fire cloud cave will rush over any time now. Yi Mo hastily reminded Yi Shiwen. Yi Shiwen nodded. He could feel several divine senses probe this place. He knew that several experts would arrive soon. So, he couldn't drag this fight any longer, otherwise, he'd die for sure. Ha ha ha, Yi Shiwen, you'll die today. Zhu Tianzong had understood what was going to happen. So, he had started to laugh out loud. His countenance also turned somewhat hideous. Yi Shiwen would be done for, as long as he could last until the arrival of the other experts. Yi Shiwen sneered. Zhu Tianzong's plan was good. But, did he have the ability to compel Yi Shiwen into dragging this fight? Yi Shiwen brandished his palm. This palm attack was invoked with the roar of a dragon. A golden dragon appeared, and tore the space into small pieces. Yi Shiwen didn't plan to delay any further. So, he had integrated the entirety of his martial power into this one palm attack. He had basically turned it into a peerless attack. Bang! Zhu Tianzong's golden cicada was defeated once again. Then, the palm attack went forward and fiercely crashed into Zhu Tianzong's body. Puff! Zhu Tianzong spouted a mouthful of blood. His chest caved inwards. He had used his hands to resist this palm attack. However, his hands had been broken in the process. Air started to leak out of his punctured chest as he suffocated to death. Yi Shiwen didn't hesitate. He immediately collected Zhu Tianzong's corpse. Then, he turned into a streamer of light and disappeared beyond the horizon. Chapter 392. Returns to the true martial university. The blue sky appeared clean for thousands of miles. There were no clouds, no wind. A figure was approaching swiftly from far away. He was anxiously rushing over from a distance. But, the speed of that figure made it was very difficult to see it with naked eyes. His lustrous body emitted golden light. He was over 20 years old. He was clad in ragged clothes. Blood dripped from his body. He was clearly in a very difficult situation. A pair of golden wings was crazily flapping behind his body. Boy, you can't get away. I will dismember your body into 1,000 pieces just to vent my anger, a loud rumbling sound came from behind. It sounded like a thunderclap. This person was over 10 feet tall. He was an incomparably sturdy and old barbarian. He held a bone club in his hand. He was pursuing closely, and getting closer and closer by taking large strides. A terrifying power was wrapped around his burly body. One could clearly see that he was a terrifying expert of the Great Sage realm. Yi Shiwen cursed his misfortune. He had escaped after he had killed Zhu Tianzong. But, he didn't expect to find a Great Sage expert chasing after him just when he had come halfway to the true martial university. He would have long been caught if he weren't Yi Shiwen. Moreover, the Devil Wings was the world's top-notch agility technique. Without it, Yi Shiwen would have been caught and slaughtered by now. However, even then, Yi Shiwen had occasionally sustained the old man's attacks. An average person would have died if they had sustained such injuries. But, his Phoenix regeneration technique was operating frantically to repair the wounds. Otherwise, he would have died a long time ago. The collapse of the Flaming Sun Temple had caught this old barbarian's attention. He had become furious, and had rushed towards Yi Shiwen after finding out that the Flaming Sun real water had been stolen. Yi Shiwen believed that a group of Great Sage experts of the Fire Cloud Cave would have come looking for him if they weren't being hindered by the allied forces of the 100 Barbarians Cave and the Devil Worship Cult. The old man's agility technique wasn't as profound as that of Yi Shiwen's. However, his martial power and cultivation were far more profound than Yi Shiwen's. He was constantly speeding up as he closely pursued Yi Shiwen. Yi Shiwen cursed. He would get caught soon if the things were to continue like this. At this moment, he faintly saw the true martial university up ahead. However, he was completely exhausted. He felt tired even though he was being supported by his gilded tyrant form. His real elemental energy had been consumed way back. So, he had consumed an incredible amount of Spirit Dawn in order to maintain his current speed. The Spirit Dawn and the primary Spirit Dawn were frantically burning inside the Heavenly Source mirror to supplement some energy to his body. The automatic regeneration of real elemental energy would have been of no help. After all, the Devil Wings was an outstanding agility technique of the Devil Kings. Only he had been capable of using the Devil Wings to travel back and forth across the world. He could travel thousands of miles in the blink of an eye. That old barbarian became anxious when he saw the true martial university getting closer and closer. He brandished his bone club. The bone club rose against the wind and went straight towards Yi Shiwen. It got bigger and bigger in size. Now, it appeared like a dragon bone as it advanced towards Yi Shiwen to tear him apart. Yi Shiwen accelerated. The Devil Wings started to flap behind him, non-stop. The intense howls of departed souls sounded from that bone club just when it was about to pound upon Yi Shiwen. The howls were the sounds of the people who had been killed by this bone club. The space in its path got shattered. It gave birth to an extremely horrifying scene. A loud shout originated from the true martial university at that critical moment. Who dares to be presumptuous in our true martial university? The void was torn open, and a big hand swept down from inside the crack. And, it grabbed that massive bone club. Bang! The terrifying collision swept out terrible energy storms. Layer upon layer of storm was swept out, like the waves of the sea. They shattered the space, and caused the chaos to leak out from the other side. Yi Shiwen suddenly felt a terrifying aftermath hitting his body. His bones got crushed. However, he didn't dare to stop. He flew swiftly, and broke into the territory of the true martial university. That old barbarian looked bitterly towards Yi Shiwen as he saw him enter the territory of the true martial university. He couldn't do anything. He wouldn't dare to enter the territory. He would die miserably if he dared to enter this territory, in spite of the fact that he was an expert of Great Sage realm. He bitterly turned around, and left. Yi Shiwen heaved a sigh of relief as he saw that old barbarian depart. He looked up and saw Ing Xian City up ahead. The person who had saved him turned out to be the old city lord of Ing Xian City. Yi Shiwen was grateful to the old city lord for saving his life. He was in a very critical situation prior to his entry into the true Martial University's territory. He relaxed only after he had entered the city. What have you done to make a great sage expert pursue you for 10,000s of miles from the fire cloud cave? The teasing voice of an old man came from the void. An old man clad in black clothes slowly walked towards Yi Shiwen. He had wrinkles on his face. He appeared to be taking short steps, but his speed was very fast. He arrived in front of Yi Shiwen within a moment. Greetings, City Lord. Yi Shiwen cupped his hands in obeisance and greeted. He grimaced in pain because of the wounds on his body. You still need to heal. The old city lord said, why did he chase you here, all the way from the fire cloud cave? Yi Shiwen smiled mischievously, and replied in somewhat embarrassed manner, I stole their flaming sun real water. Yi Shiwen felt that he had met with an elder of his own family. Such was the old city lord's impression on his psyche. In fact, Yi Shiwen felt as if he had bathed in the spring breeze. The true Martial University was very big. Several people found him unpleasing to the eye, and often tried to eradicate him. Only a few people treated him nicely. Yi Shiwen thought that he should tell the truth. It would have been okay to conceal it if nobody had found out, since they wouldn't have found any evidence that he was the one behind the missing flaming sun real water. However, they had already found out about it. And, he had also been chased down. This matter couldn't remain hidden for long. People would come to know about it, sooner or later. However, he didn't care much. He wasn't worried about the higher authorities. The flaming sun real water was undoubtedly extremely precious. But, only for the southern wastelands forces. They could use the flaming sun real water to cultivate the real body of the barbarian god. In fact, they could use it to create a generation of disciples who could become the future pillars. No wonder it was extremely precious. Only the most outstanding geniuses, or the person with maximum contribution to their sect, could obtain this reward. But, it could only be used as nourishment for practicing the tyrant body technique for an outsider like Yi Shiwen. That's because only a few forces of the southern wasteland knew how to use the secret technique of flaming sun real water. This hadn't been revealed to the outsiders. Moreover, the higher authorities would never plunder the treasures of the disciples. After all, these disciples would have to be entirely dependent on the true Martial University for their cultivation if they didn't come across such fortuitous encounters. And that would be simply far insufficient for their progress. It could be said that the people in the higher authorities wouldn't have made it to the top if they hadn't come across such fortuitous encounters in their young age. Moreover, it would ruin the reputation of the true Martial University if the higher-ups were to start extorting the disciples. Therefore, Yi Shiwen scrapped the idea of using this as a hidden trump. Ha 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 ha, the old city lord burst into laughter after he listened to Yi Shiwen's reply. He spoke in a carefree manner, good, well done. You've done a good job. The relation between the true Martial University and other forces wasn't very good. The 100 Barbarians Cave, Fire Cloud Cave, Eagle Cave, and several other forces of the southern wasteland had consistently tried to invade the southern region. One couldn't tell how many times they had attacked the true Martial University. They were considered as the arch-rivals of the true Martial University. I must say that you're very courageous, the old city lord looked at Yi Shiwen and said. He shook his head and continued to laugh. Yi Shiwen's injuries had been repaired over the course of their conversation. He was nearly back to normal. The old city lord's complexion suddenly turned solemn after Yi Shiwen told him about the devil worship cult and the 100 Barbarians Cave's joint attack against the Fire Cloud Cave. These colossus forces held incredible influence in the true martial world. The consequences would be inconceivable if the Fire Cloud Cave had genuinely been attacked by the allied forces of the devil worship cult and the 100 Barbarians Cave. This would have been a trivial matter if the 100 Barbarians Cave had attacked alone. However, they had persuaded the devil worship cult for help. The 100 Barbarians Cave must have offered great benefits to them in return. However, thanks to that, the devil worship cult would seize this opportunity to expand its influence. This wasn't good. In fact, it was very bad. The old city lord didn't stay for long. He hurriedly left after he listened to Yi Zaiwen's words. Yi Shiwen didn't mind. He advanced towards the Merit Palace Hall to submit the finished mission of Zhu Tianzong's assassination. He had thoroughly completed this mission. Countless disciples began to talk among themselves as soon as Yi Shiwen entered the Merit Palace Hall. Yi Shiwen has arrived. Oh my god, this is going to be a startling clash. Didn't you say that Yi Shiwen was afraid and wouldn't arrive? But, he's already here. Perhaps, the fight will break out shortly. Yi Zaiwen's arrival had set off an uproar. We can see a battle of life or death between two Heaven's Pride level experts. One doesn't get such an opportunity very often. I don't think that Yi Shiwen will agree to participate in this mortal combat. The opponent possesses Titan body. His body is incredibly strong. Yi Shiwen was somewhat baffled. What life or death battle? However, he wasn't interested in pondering over this matter. First, he wanted to submit the completed mission. Yi Shiwen went into the depths of Merit Palace Hall. The Merit Elder had already obtained the news of his arrival, and was waiting for him. He smiled as he saw Yi Shiwen carrying a person's head. He said, "We weren't wrong about you." He examined Zhu Tianzong's head, and was amazed to realize that Zhu Tianzong had already reached the semi-sage realm at the time of his death. However, Yi Shiwen had still managed to kill him. A whole new level of respect emerged inside his heart for Yi Shiwen. Anyway, our Merit Palace Hall owes you a big favor for this mission, the Merit Elder spoke. Elder is being modest. Yi Shiwen smiled and said. However, you seem to be in a lot of trouble now. You may not know this, but that Titan guy is looking for you. The Merit Elder looked at Yi Shiwen and said, our Merit Palace Hall can step in to settle this dispute if you don't wish to come forward. Chapter 393. Our Merit Palace Hall can step in to settle this dispute if you don't want to come forward, the Merit Elder looked at Yi Shiwen and said. Yi Shiwen came to know from the Merit Elder that a storm had been set off in the True Martial University during his absence. Someone in the younger generation had stood up and claimed that they had broken through to the semi-sage realm. It had caused a sensation inside the university. That person was none other than the guy with the Titan body. He was regarded as a top-notch Heaven's Pride level expert in the younger generation. However, it didn't limit to this only. The Titan guy had issued a declaration of battle to Yi Shiwen right after he made the announcement that he had entered the semi-sage realm. Moreover, it wasn't an ordinary declaration of battle. It was for a mortal combat, an intense battle of life or death. This declaration of battle caused a huge sensation. Everyone was in uproar. Such battle only took place between two mortal enemies. This was going to be a mortal combat, and would only end with the death of any one of the two contenders. It was clear that the guy with the Titan body held deep hatred towards Yi Shiwen to have desired such a deadly confrontation. Thanks to Yi Zaiwen's previous battles, it was too obvious to everyone that he possessed a gilded body. In fact, he was also known as the Golden War God. Yi Shiwen and that Titan guy were well known for their incredibly strong bodies among this session's Heaven's Pride level experts. It was said that the experts with the Titan's body possessed the bloodline of the Titan race. That's why he had such an intrepid body. The Titan race used to be a famous godly race at one point of time. Yi Zaiwen's title of Golden War God was fierce. And, it had spread far and wide. After all, he had repeatedly used his extremely strong body to kill his opponents. Many people were thinking, who among these two individuals possessed a more intrepid body? It was already determined that the Titan guy possessed Titan's blood. But, nobody knew anything about Yi Zaiwen's physique. They didn't know whose bloodline Yi Shiwen possessed. And, they didn't know why it was so tough. It was needless to say that they were unaware that Yi Zaiwen's physique wasn't derived from his bloodline, its toughness was derived from the practice of a technique called Gilded Tyrant Form. Everyone was excited. They were looking forward to it. This was the first collision between two Heaven's Pride level experts of this session since they had been named. Undoubtedly, this was the most anticipated battle in the eyes of many people. And most importantly, the Titan guy had challenged Yishuan to a mortal combat. They would have no choice but to go all out to kill each other in this battle of life or death. It was evident that one of these two experts would choose death over defeat. So, the fight was going to be intense, without a doubt. Countless people were looking forward to this fight, and many of them were discussing about it. After all, the martial arts competition among the four forces was right around the corner. The general conduct should have been to keep these geniuses out of the harm's way, since they were bound to become main contenders in the upcoming competition. Let alone, allowing them kill each other in a mortal combat. Most people believed that the Titan guy was extremely overbearing. Then, what was the need for such a battle? Was it in order to obtain the title of strongest body? Is it the beginning of the conquest to become the strongest in the younger generation? Does nobody in the higher authorities care about it? Shouldn't someone stop this fight? Many people were discussing about this matter. Some were excited to see the battle between two Heaven's Pride level experts. Some didn't wish to see the fighting strength of the true martial university decline by losing a Heaven's Pride level expert. This wasn't an ordinary fight. Victory and defeat wouldn't decide the result. A mortal combat ended very differently. No matter who would win or lose, the fight wouldn't stop until the losing contender had been killed. In other words, one individual, whether Yishuan or the Titan guy, was going to die. The death of an ordinary person was nothing. But, it would be a massive loss if one among these two experts would die, since it would be tantamount to the death of a possible future great sage expert. Some people had opposed this matter. But, some people had also endorsed it. In fact, many people had even added fuel to the fire from the shadows. Some people even hoped for Yishuan and the Titan guy to mutually eradicate each other. There were several people who were somewhat worried. After all, these two experts could become the true martial university's backbone in the future. So, they only wanted these two Heaven's Pride level experts to indulge in an ordinary match to decide a victor, and satisfy their curiosity with that much alone. They didn't wish to see a mortal battle. Many senior experts from previous sessions were also excited to see the match between this session's new disciples. Doesn't the higher authority care about this matter? Would they blankly watch the death of a future great sage expert? No way. I've heard that some high-level experts are supporting this fight. The chief of the Clear Sky Peak is going out of his way to support that Titan guy. Otherwise, how could this fight have been approved in the first place? Neither of those two experts can be taken lightly. That Titan expert has become stronger after he entered the true martial university. And, thanks to his special Titan physique, he is capable of killing an ordinary expert of the semi-sage realm with just one slap. Yishuan can't be taken lightly either. He has completed many impossible missions in the last 2 years. He even penetrated deep into the lair of the devil worship cult to assassinate his target, and managed to come back alive. But that's useless now. Yishuan hasn't stepped into the semi-sage realm as of yet. But, that Titan guy has. And, he's impatiently waiting to kill Yishuan. It seems that he harbors a great hatred for Yishuan. What kind of an enmity do these two have in reality? Every outsider had a different opinion. The Merit Elder lightly glanced at Yishuan. The Merit Palace Hall wanted to settle this matter for Yishuan because he had assassinated Zhu Tianzong, and they owed him a big favor for that. So, they wanted to seize this opportunity to return the favor. There's no need for that. I can settle this matter of my own. Yishuan lightly replied. Since that Titan guy wanted a fight, he would give him one. He also wanted to know whether his gilded tyrant form was stronger than the Titan body or not. The Merit Elder looked at Yishuan, but didn't speak further. He had anticipated that Yizaiwan's fighting strength had only reached the Legendary's Great Complete Realm, or quite possibly the initial stage of the Semi-Sage Realm. But, Yishuan was far inferior to that Titan expert, since the latter had likely reached the peak of the initial stage of the Semi-Sage Realm. There was a difference of heaven and earth between the two. However, the Merit Elder felt that he had underestimated Yi Xuan after he realized that Yi Xuan had killed Zhu Tianzong without even being a semi-sage expert himself. Yi Xuan wasn't as simple as he had anticipated. He could faintly sense that Yi Zaiwen's aura carried the principles of the semi-sage realm. This had left him even more shocked. The Merit Palace Hall had initially anticipated that Yi Xuan wouldn't be able to settle this matter on his own. So, they wanted to help him in getting rid of this problem. On one hand, they wanted to help him because they owed him a big favor. On the other hand, they wanted to establish a good relation with him since he might become a great sage expert in the future. He became somewhat depressed after he heard that Yi Xuan could settle this dispute on his own. However, Yi Zaiwen's statement had made it seem that it would be a direct collision between two outstanding Heaven's Pride level experts of the younger generation, and a battle to death. The atmosphere was already quite heated, but it had suddenly erupted with Yi Zaiwen's return. Many people had thought that Yi Xuan might be scared, and that's why he had gone into hiding. However, these rumors vanished along with his return. Yi Xuan wasn't gone because he was afraid. Rather, he was completing a secret mission. Nobody knew about this mission earlier. However, the Merit Palace Hall confirmed it later when they stood out for Yi Xuan. However, the focus was no longer on whether Yi Xuan was afraid or not. Now, it had shifted to the startling collision which could take place any time now since Yi Xuan had finally returned. Yi Xuan returned to the Hidden Star Peak. The second brother and third sister were still undergoing their closed-door training. The Hidden Star Peak had received incredible benefits by obtaining the complete version of the Hidden Star Scripture. The entire Hidden Star Peak was extremely quiet. But, it would be a huge mistake to look down on the current Hidden Star Peak. The Merit Elder also told Yi Xuan that several Heaven's Pride level experts had already left for the chaotic Heavenly Foreign Territory to temper their bodies. This chaotic Heavenly Foreign Territory was situated far away in the remote starry sky. There was a lot of chaos there, just as its name suggested. Only the elites could go there. An average person couldn't enter the chaotic heavenly region, not even the experts of Legendary Realm could. Several of the Heaven's Pride level experts had rushed to the chaotic heavenly region. They believed that they could advance by leaps and bounds within no time after they had tempered their bodies in the chaotic heavenly region. Yi Xuan was no exception either. However, this upsurge didn't stop after Yi Zaiwen's return. Rather, it became more ardent. A disciple of the Clear Sky Peak arrived to meet Yi Xuan. His eyebrows were as sharp as swords, and his eyes shone like the stars. He was floating in midair, and carried an aloof personality. The god will arrive to kill you half a month from now. Start making the arrangements for your funeral. This disciple had already stepped into the semi-sage realm. He was also a new disciple of this session. But, Yi Xuan and this man weren't the same. This disciple had already reached Legendary's Great Complete Realm when Yi Xuan and the others had entered the true martial university. He wasn't like the Titan guy or the other top-tier experts. The top-tier experts had chosen to struggle within the half-step Legendary's Great Complete Realm, and would then have a breakthrough to the semi-sage realm. However, this man had switched to the easy cultivation in the Legendary Realm, and had then stepped into the semi-sage realm. That was why most people didn't pay much attention to him. The other Heaven's Pride level experts were merely at half-step Legendary's Great Complete Realm, but they still got more attention and resources than him. Yi Zaiwen's eyes flashed as he spotted the emblem of the Army of God at the top of this young man's head. That's right, this disciple had the emblem of the Army of God on his body. This meant that that expert with Titan body was one of the gods. Yi Xuan had already killed 3 gods out of 5. Therefore, the Titan guy could be either the first god or the second god. Yi Xuan hadn't heard any news about the Army of God for a long period of time. That's why he had forgotten about them. Yi Xuan felt strange. The first god and the second god had already arrived inside the true martial university. Why didn't this matter make any noise up till now? It seemed like there were no commotions earlier because he was waiting until he had stepped into semi-sage realm. He revealed his identity only after he became a semi-sage expert because he could kill Yishuan now. I didn't expect that you'd still be haunting me like a ghost. Yishuan coldly snorted and spoke. Chapter 394. Yishuan, don't you dare act arrogantly before me. You'll be killed by the god this time. No one can save you. The young man looked coldly at Yishuan and said. He was looking down on Yishuan. He would have killed Yishuan right now if the second god hadn't decided to carry out the task personally. The experts under the sage level were like ants. This sentence might seem like a joke. But there was some truth in this ages-old saying. Of course, this young man wasn't yet at the sage realm. However, he was at the semi-sage realm. This meant that he had touched the threshold of the sage realm. As far as he was concerned, there was no difference between ants and a legendary realm expert like Yishuan. And this ant had dared to talk back to him. His complexion had suddenly turned ugly because of this. Someone like you isn't qualified enough to talk to me like this. Yishuan replied indifferently. His complexion turned cold. He wasn't taking this semi-sage expert seriously. Humph. I would have taken your head myself and sent you on your way to the afterlife if the god didn't wish to kill you with his own hands. The young man looked coldly at Yishuan. Don't think that the higher-ups can save your life. They've already agreed to the fight between you and the god. You can't avoid this fight now. Nor can you escape. Hatred flashed in the eyes of that young man. The army of God was well regarded on the ancient road. They were like the kings of the world. However, it had declined because 3 of the gods had been slain by Yishuan. Several members of the army of God had left afterwards. This had led to their collapse. The god had tempered his body, and had obtained the title of Titan Body. However, that couldn't eliminate the fact that Yishuan had killed 3 gods, and brought about their gradual decline. He felt that Yishuan had earlier disappeared because he wanted to escape from the god's wrath. You members of the army of God really wish to throw away your lives. Yishuan sneered. You're all just a bunch of idiots. Do you wish to die right now? The young man looked coldly at Yishuan. He didn't restrain his killing intention as he continued to stare at Yishuan. He was dying to kill Yishuan on the spot. Do you think you're a god or something? That you can decide who will die and who will not? Unfortunately, this world isn't under your control. Yishuan sneered and spoke. Do you think that you can kill me for him? That's really funny. Yishuan grinned and added. He wouldn't have waited till now if he was confident that he could kill me. The god is invincible. He has an outstanding personality. Killing you will be a piece of cake for him. He wouldn't have tolerated your arrogance for this long if not for the closed-door training that he had to undergo in order to fulfill our peak's requirements. That young man simply disregarded Yishuan's provocative words. Idiot. Yishuan didn't harbor a favorable opinion of people who blindly worshipped someone. People like this young man couldn't see the truth clearly because of such blind worship. Yishuan stood up. He didn't wish to argue with this man any further. He flew towards the sky. Where do you think you're going? The young man shouted. Chaotic heavenly territory. Yishuan replied lightly. God has challenged you to a fight here. Didn't you hear that? Are you deaf or what? The young man asked loudly. Your God is too full of himself. Yishuan sneered and spoke. Doesn't he realize that the world doesn't revolve around him? He wants to fight with me. Tell him to come to the chaotic heavenly territory. I would gladly make his wish come true if he wants to die so badly. I can see that you're afraid. You've been running since the time the god challenged you. You've just arrived, and now you're trying to escape again. You're a coward. And, an incompetent person, that young man retorted sarcastically. Yishuan ignored his barking, and flew straight towards the sky. I will kill you if you bother me again. Yishuan declared with a cold expression on his face. Yishuan didn't mind fighting with that Titan body expert. But he didn't feel like waiting for it to happen. So, he suddenly didn't seem interested in the fight. Anyway, that Titan body expert wouldn't let him go that easily. But why was he willing to wait for so long to kill Yishuan? Stop right there. That young man couldn't help but launch an attack as he saw Yishuan running away. His entire body got covered in bursts of fiery red light. They looked like a group of flames as they went straight towards Yishuan. The huge sound of explosion attracted the attention of many surrounding disciples. Yizaiwan's return had already attracted the attention of many people since they wanted to see how Yishuan would face that Titan guy's challenge. However, he was now engaged in a conflict with that young man. Yishuan didn't say anything. The Han seal smashed down from above. It seemed as if a large mountain had transformed into a giant dragon as it swept down. It also carried traces of the earth attribute principles. They were seething incessantly, and looked exceedingly gorgeous. Bang! A loud explosion resounded as the two parties ferociously collided into each other. That young man's red flames got crushed by Yizaiwan's Han seal. His red flames weren't a match for the Hanshan seal, and had been crushed into light particles. The young man frantically retreated upon seeing his attack being defeated in this manner. And he tried his utmost to get out of Yizaiwan's Han seal attack's range. However, Yishuan launched another attack, and stretched out his big golden hand to grab him. The big hand appeared just like a golden cloud. It blotted out the sky and covered the earth, and ultimately pounded upon that young man. The young man wanted to escape. However, Yizaiwan's big golden hand didn't allow him to. It swept down like an inescapable net. It formed a golden cage as it landed on the earth. It suppressed him with immediate effect. No! That young man screamed, "Fire Lotus Brilliant Sun Beheader." The young man stretched out his hand and shouted. A flaming lotus emitted incredibly terrifying rays of light towards Yizaiwan's big golden hand. It seemed as if they could burn the entire world. However, that turned out to be useless. Yishuan casually stretched out his big golden hand, and it crushed that flaming lotus. That flaming lotus which could burn the world didn't turn out to be a match for Yizaiwan's attack. Yizaiwan's big golden hand rolled down, as if to suppress a rebellion. That flaming lotus had been crushed in a flash. Yishuan slapped that young man. He went flying into the sky like a shooting star, and crashed into a mountain. The bones in his body got shattered as a result of the impact, and blood splattered. That young man of semi-sage realm had been defeated quite quickly. In fact, he didn't have the power to fight back. His offensive had been crushed by Yishuan in an instant. Yishuan hadn't even made any major movements. He had merely raised his hand to suppress him. This scene had stunned the onlookers. They had been attracted by the battle between Yishuan and that young man. However, they hadn't anticipated that Yishuan would effortlessly suppress that young man by merely raising his hand. How is this possible? That young man is a semi-sage expert. But he couldn't even take Yizaiwan's one move, and was sent flying. Just how terrifying is this Yishuan? Many people were left in shock as they saw this scene. They simply couldn't believe what they had just witnessed. Now I understand why that Titan guy waited for his cultivation to reach the semi-sage realm before he provoked Yishuan. He might become Yizaiwan's food if he hadn't cultivated till the semi-sage realm. This battle shouldn't have been so one-sided even if Yishuan were at semi-sage realm. That young man is a semi-sage expert. But he still failed to be Yizaiwan's opponent. These Heaven's Pride level experts are extremely frightening. Yizaiwan's naming as a Heaven's Pride level expert didn't happen by fluke. Each of these Heaven's Pride level experts has their own trump cards. I had earlier anticipated that Yishuan would get screwed. However, it seems that I was wrong. Yishuan turned out to be so powerful that he casually defeated a semi-sage expert. I'm afraid this Yishuan may turn out to be a headache for that Titan body expert. It seems like the battle between them won't turn out to be boring after all. It will evolve into a fierce struggle between two evenly matched opponents. Yi Xuan calmly arrived in front of that young man, who had been nailed into the mountain peak. Then, he said, 3 days, I'll wait for him for 3 days. I'll leave after that. I'll wipe out your entire army of God if any one of you comes to bother me thereafter. Yi Xuan wasn't afraid of fighting with that Titan guy. However, he was very annoyed with these flunkies of the army of God. The news about this battle spread out within no time. Many disciples who had been eagerly waiting to watch the fight between Yi Xuan and the Titan guy were left shell-shocked. Most people hadn't been optimistic about Yi Xuan's chances. They figured that he'd die this time because Yi Xuan hadn't stepped into the semi-sage realm, unlike his opponent. There was a difference of heaven and earth between a semi-sage expert and a non-semi-sage expert. In fact, most people had figured that Yi Xuan might not be able to fight back when faced with a powerful expert of the semi-sage realm. Everyone was waiting for the members of Hidden Star Peak to step in to stop this fight. This was supposed to be mortal combat. However, both the experts were like precious treasures for their respective inheritances. There wouldn't have been any problem if this match was only about learning by exchanging pointers. But, they were expected to come forward to stop the battle if their disciples' lives were in danger. Moreover, there was a difference of one whole step between Yi Xuan and the Titan guy's respective levels. Therefore, Yi Xuan wouldn't lose face even if he were to back down or lose. After all, he wouldn't be losing to an expert of the same realm. Moreover, a short-term failure was simply nothing. After all, they would grow stronger in the future, possibly 10,000 times or even more. This wasn't the time for these young experts to stir up troubles, or put their lives on the line. So, a short-term failure had no consequence in anyone's opinion. Moreover, there would be many competitions on this road to invincibility. That would help them in understanding oneself clearly. It shouldn't be the strength but the heart that should be invincible. Only those experts who possessed invincible hearts would be able to walk on this road till the very end. No one could dare say that they were above everyone else. After all, there would always be someone stronger. But, possessing an invincible heart would give one the power to surpass others. Yi Xuan might not be a match for that Titan guy right now. Even so, nobody would belittle him for that. After all, Yi Xuan was an outstanding talent, irrespective of the level of his current strength. Most people didn't say it out loud. But, everyone had sharp eyes, and they had noticed this much for sure. Chapter 395. Yi Xuan's strength had been ranked among the strengths of the Heaven's Pride level experts. However, Semi-Sage Realm was just the starting point for these Heaven's Pride level experts, nothing more. Afterwards, there was Sage Realm and Great Sage Realm. Therefore, this was just a beginning. It was difficult to determine the true victor in a battle among Heaven's Pride level experts, unless it was a battle of life or death. However, Yi Xuan had displayed terrifying strength just now. He had suppressed a semi-sage expert by merely raising his hand. This terrifying strength had made everyone speechless. Yi Xuan had once again stunned everyone. Perhaps, the upcoming battle would genuinely turn out to be a fierce battle between two evenly matched opponents. 3 days. Yi Xuan had given just 3 days of time. He would leave if the Titan guy didn't show up within 3 days. This statement had once again left everyone in shock. That Titan guy had been trying to rally as much support of the people as he could in order to kill Yi Xuan by claiming that Yi Xuan was an evenly matched opponent. In contrast, Yi Xuan hadn't even spared him a glance. He had merely said that he'd wait for 3 days, at most. Then, he'd leave. And, he would leave for the chaotic heavenly region. He was clearly looking down on the Titan body. This had left several people in uproar. People didn't find it strange that Yi Xuan was planning to go to the chaotic heavenly region. After all, he wasn't the only Heaven's Pride level expert who wished to go to the chaotic heavenly region. In fact, it was said that the Titan guy also wanted to go to the chaotic heavenly world. However, he couldn't go because he had to stay here and wait for Yi Xuan's arrival. However, Yishuan didn't care about his fight with the Titan guy. He was very busy. And, if his opponent wasn't going to come out soon, then he might as well get the hell out of his way. Most people had initially thought that the Titan guy was very arrogant. They figured that he'd kill Yishuan irrespective of whether he'd accept the challenge or not. He was extremely overbearing. However, Yishuan turned out to be far more insolent. He didn't care about who was challenging him. If they wanted to confront him, then they must come sooner. Otherwise, they should get the hell away from him. Everyone waited for the Titan guy's reaction. Meanwhile, they slowly came to know about the conflict between him and Yishuan. They found out that the Titan body guy was the second god of the army of God. It used to be a huge group, and had ruled the ancient road. However, it was brought to its knees when 3 of the gods were killed by Yishuan. This led to the collapse of the army of God, and they hadn't been able to restore their prestige ever since. In addition, the first god had disappeared mysteriously. So, all the responsibilities had fallen onto the shoulders of the only remaining second god. It was difficult for the second god to support the army of God by himself. Hence, the reputation of this outstanding organization had declined within no time. They had gone low-key for a certain period of time. The grudge between Yishuan and the second god was as high as the sky and as deep as the ocean. It was no wonder that the second god had started to look for Yishuan after he had stepped into the semi-sage realm. Anyone would have gone crazy with anger by now if they were in his place. Yishuan also came to know a lot from the rumors. He realized that the Titan guy was actually the second god. No wonder there had been no news about the army of God in these 2 years. Yishuan had already killed the 3rd, 4th, and the 5th god. The first god had disappeared mysteriously. Such a massive army of God had become entirely dependent on the second god because of Yishuan. Not just that, Yishuan had nearly smashed and torn the army of God to pieces. This had scattered their forces. This had left the second god in deep trouble since he had to consolidate the forces. Therefore, he hadn't gotten a chance to come looking for Yishuan back then. As a matter of fact, he had recently stepped into the semi-sage realm, and had finally managed to sort out the internal matters of the army of God. So, he could freely deal with Yishuan now. Yishuan was also determined to settle this matter of the second god. There was no trace of the first god out of the 5 gods of the army of God. And the 3rd, 4th, and the 5th god had already died in his hands. So, he would only have to be careful of the first god who was still missing after he had killed the second god. In fact, he could seize the opportunity to crush the entire army of God once he had killed the second god. After that, Yishuan wouldn't have to be worried about anything even if the remaining first god were to appear later on. This was a rare opportunity. The opposite party was looking to seize this opportunity to kill him. Why shouldn't he do the same? Root out the source of trouble to avoid recurring future troubles. 3 days passed in an instant. Countless lofty mountains of the true martial university pierced through the sky. The loud roars of beasts could be heard echoing from the mountain forests. It appeared like a wonderland in the human world. Hidden Star Peak was bustling with countless disciples. They had gathered to spectate. There were experts of Legendary Realm, Truth Realm, Semi-Sage Realm, and Sage Realm as well. In fact, several experts of the Great Sage Realm had been alerted about this. They had also arrived to watch. Yishuan waited on the Hidden Star Peak in silence. He was waiting for the second god to arrive. Suddenly, a loud shout rang through the vast sky. It pierced through the clouds in the sky. The space rippled like the water's surface. A light green figure ripped open the sky, and rushed towards the Hidden Star Peak. He had a robust physique. He was 10 feet tall, and looked extremely powerful. His facial features were as sharp as a knife. He had bright and piercing eyes. His eyebrows slanted to his temples. He looked extremely valiant. The space distorted and collapsed wherever that figure went. His incomparably dreadful form then swept out from the spatial cracks. The Titan guy has arrived. Some people with sharp eyes had recognized this figure. His overwhelming and strong aura had shaken the heaven and earth. It's indeed the Titan guy. Just look at his body. No wonder they call him Titan Body. He's got such a majestic stature. An ordinary person's physique wouldn't even come close. He possesses the bloodline of the Titan race. It was true. The Titans themselves were ancient gods. That's why his subordinates are known as the Army of God. Such terrifying imposing aura can suppress a truth-level expert to death. He has an invincible body, one derived from an immemorial race. I'm not very optimistic about Yi Shiwen. I still think that Yi Shiwen has hope. I guess you haven't seen him fight before. He unleashes an overwhelming golden ocean. He appears like a golden god when he casts out that golden ocean move. It almost appears as if he's God who has descended to rule the world. His body isn't inferior to that of the Titan body. I've yet to hear of an expert who could challenge Yi Xiwen's physique. This will absolutely turn out to be a fierce battle between two evenly matched giants. Yi Shiwen, come out to die, the voice of the second god exploded after he arrived in front of the hidden star peak. The sonic booms exploded in all directions. It seemed like a Milky Way of huge sound waves had swept across. It had caused the massive trees in the surrounding area to collapse. Humph! You're an arrogant young man. Come, I'll teach you the profoundness of this world, a cold sound transmitted from the hidden star peak. It was followed by a startling sword energy. The sword energy rushed towards the sky in a flash. It streaked across the vast sky and shattered the space. Even the chaos started to leak out from cracked space. This is a matter of the younger generation. We mustn't interfere, a discontented sound echoed from the depths of the void. A massive hand swept down from the sky and grabbed that startling sword energy. Bang! It seemed as if the entire world had collapsed and broken into small pieces. An incomparably horrifying light burst out in a flash. The yin and yang elements of chaos leaked out and spread around. The terrifying aura swept out in the surroundings. Wei Guangyuan, you old fart, you dare to go along with his unreasonable and reckless actions, an angry voice sounded from the hidden star peak. Bai Jian-song came flying from that direction. His eyes were open wide. He seemed to be glaring angrily. Bai Jian-song had come out of his closed-door training because of Yi Xiwen's matter. He had recently stepped into the Great Sage realm. So, he didn't have too much control on his own power. His Great Sage aura was leaking out. And it was forming a terrifying cyclone around him. He didn't very different from a devil god. However, the place in the depths of the void was still tranquil. Nothing happened from that direction. What? Clear Sky Peak's Wei Guangyuan is personally supporting the Titan guy. No wonder he has dared to openly challenge Yi Shiwen to a death fight, an expert uttered in surprise. Wei Guangyuan held a very high position in the Clear Sky Peak. He was the chief of the elders. He had personally shown up for this event. That clearly showed that the Clear Sky Peak was supporting the second god in his mission to kill Yi Shiwen. Nobody would have bothered if this matter concerned ordinary disciples. After all, the true martial university had a massive pool of disciples. A large number of these disciples died every day. Sometimes, they died in the hands of the experts of other forces, or got killed by demon beasts and so on. Casualties to such disciples weren't unusual. However, Yi Shiwen and the Titan guy were ranked among the Heaven's Pride-level experts of this generation. Only a few people could be considered as treasures in a particular generation. They were extremely precious. Only these people could become the pillars of the true martial university in the future. The death of any such expert would set off a huge unrest. Moreover, both the experts were looking to kill each other. This matter was bound to attract the attentions of countless people. In fact, it could even lead to an overall conflict between their inheritances. Every Heaven's level disciple was like a future pillar for any inheritance. Death of any such expert could injure their strength very greatly. The hidden star peak had very few people. However, that didn't mean that one could crush them that easily. Clear Sky Peak was ranked among the top 10 inheritances. Their strength was profound, simply incredible. There was a possibility of a full-scale conflict between the two inheritances. There would have been no issues if this was a conflict between two individuals alone. However, Wei Guangyuan had arrived here. This revealed the intention of the Clear Sky Peak very clearly. They stood strong in the second god's support. They were clearly biased, and in favor of the second god. Bai Jian-song had immediately understood the Clear Sky Peak's intentions. That had made him furious. The Titan guy himself was extremely overbearing. And now, the Clear Sky Peak also stood in his support. He couldn't help being furious at this. Chapter 396. The confrontation between these two individuals had transformed into a confrontation between two forces. Moreover, these two forces belonged to the ranks of the top 100 inheritances. And, the confrontation between these two inheritances would be a startling event. Bai Jian-song's eyes were ice cold. His recently attained fearful strength of the Great Sage realm was boiling. His real elemental energy was extremely terrifying. He could shoot down the stars and grab the moonlight by merely lifting his hand. Several people exclaimed in admiration. Bai Jian-song used to be at half-step Great Sage realm. But, he had finally stepped into the Great Sage realm after 2 years of closed-door training. He was an outstanding talent of his generation. So, many people knew about him. However, he had been stuck at the half-step Great Sage realm for decades. But now, he had finally crossed this step, and had opened boundless future prospects for himself by becoming a high-level expert of the true martial university. Bai Jian-song had sword cultivation. He was a sword expert with tyrannical strength. In fact, he was far more tyrannical than the martial experts of his realm. Humph! Bai Jian-song sneered and brandished his sword. This caused an explosion. The startling sword energy streaked across the vast sky for dozens of miles. It rushed towards the second god to rip him apart. Bai Jian-song, you're too presumptuous, the expert who had been waiting at a distant place couldn't help but roar out at this time. Then, his figure finally appeared. The sword attack carried such a terrifying power that it couldn't be stopped from afar. So, this expert had to appear in person to stop it. A slightly thin figure appeared in the sky. His real elemental energy surged up in the void and began to boil. A big hand grabbed the sword energy and stopped it from hitting the second god. Bai Jian-song, you're repeatedly attacking a disciple of our Clear Sky Peak. Are you planning to start a war between the two peaks? Wei Guangyuan shouted. He had grabbed that sword energy. However, his white hair was still fluttering under the impact of the formidable energy. Bai Jian-song sneered and spoke, this disciple of your Clear Sky Peak is going too far. You're the one who agreed to this bullshit mortal combat. You're such a moron. If this will lead to war, then it's better to start the war. Our hidden star peak has very few people. But, it's not easy to bully us. Bai Jian-song and Wei Guangyuan clashed as he finished speaking. They forced their way up into the blue sky while they remained engaged in a fight with each other. They tore open the void and went inside. Their battle was extremely terrifying. After all, two great sage experts were engaged in a hand-to-hand combat. It could destroy the nearby peaks. The sky was shattered and broken into small pieces. Endless amount of chaos rolled down from the debris. Several Sage Realm experts abandoned the second god's side and rushed into the void to keep up with Bai Jian-song and Wei Guangyuan. Even the Sage Realm experts rarely got to witness a fight between two great sage experts. Wei Guangyuan was a peak-level expert of the Great Sage Realm. He had been famous for over 1,000 years. Bai Jian-song was a matured person as well. He too had lived for hundreds of years. These two experts didn't belong to the same generation, but their power could easily overwhelm their opponent. They possessed outstanding power and prestige in their respective generations. Not to mention that the pure sword cultivation of these two was incredible and contained formidable attack power. It was indeed a wonderful duel that wasn't just exceptional, but rarely seen. The clash between two junior disciples of the same sect had given rise to this heaven-shaking battle. Humph! Yi Shiwen, come out to die. Nobody will disturb us now. Let's fight, the second god sneered. His bronze-colored face exposed a somewhat evil grin. A sonic boom dissipated in all directions, and left the entire hidden star peak to tremble violently. Many experts in the surroundings were excited by this. Finally, this day had arrived. They had waited for 3 days. This was the first collision between two Heaven's Pride-level experts of the younger generation. The expedition to rule this generation was going to begin from this point. The second god's cold fighting power spread in the void. His tall figure began to exude cyan-colored energy, which started to surge up. He appeared like the reincarnation of an ancient titan. The cyan-colored real elemental energy wrapped around his body like armor. He held a half-broken lance in his hand. It could be seen that this half-broken lance must have been patched up by an outstanding expert. However, it didn't look like the original one. He had inherited this ancient lance from his ancestors. It was said that this lance had been used as a weapon by a real titan once upon a time. The second god had inherited it from the ancestors of the army of God countless years ago. The lance he had inherited was broken. Later, he had asked the best godsmith to craft the rear part of the lance and patch it. It was still far short of its original power. However, it was still very difficult to endure. The space unceasingly collapsed and restored wherever that lance went. This continuous destruction and construction of the space left everyone to tremble with fear. The second god was without any protection besides that. His body itself was his best defense. Many people looked at the tyrannical figure of the second god from behind, and started to whisper amongst themselves. The second god was extremely tyrannical. It was evident from his aura that an ordinary expert of the semi-sage realm wouldn't be able to block his lance, and would be stabbed to death by the lance in one shot. In fact, no one knew how strong he really was. Nobody knew whether the other expert could resist this lance or not. After all, none of the other Heaven's Pride-level experts had fought with him yet. So, people could also only speculate the extent of his strength. And now, they could obtain clues from this battle between him and Yi Shiwen. He enjoyed an outstanding reputation. However, Yi Ziwen's reputation was even more incredible. He had killed the disciples of the law enforcement hall on his very first day after he had entered the true martial university. Millions of disciples had arrived in this session, but only Yi Shiwen could dare to deal with such a matter. The second god's killing intention turned ice cold. The pain of losing his brothers had made him extremely ferocious. Even his killing intention had turned exceptionally strong. Nobody dared to approach him since his intense killing intention would tear them apart. In fact, his killing intention wouldn't just kill the body, it might even kill the soul. Several experts of the younger generation felt greatly disappointed with themselves since they had been secretly comparing themselves with the second god. They had thought that these Heaven's Pride-level experts were just extraordinary, nothing more. And, it was just their own bad luck that they couldn't become one. However, they had come to realize that they would have never been chosen as Heaven's Pride-level expert even if they had a better luck. They had now witnessed the incomparable tyranny of the second god, and they had realized that it was impossible to reach that level. The Heaven's Pride-level experts couldn't be taken lightly. Yi Shiwen had also passed through many intense battles like any other Heaven's Pride-level expert. And, he had won them all in order to be ranked as a Heaven's Pride-level expert. So, people had no choice but to acknowledge him. Bang! The golden divinities condensed into a pillar of energy and pierced through the void. It cut across the sky and surged up violently. It scattered in all directions like a golden ocean. It seemed as if a golden country had been formed, the very country of gods. A figure appeared in front of everyone. It was surfing on the golden waves. He had bright and piercing eyes, and the golden energy was surging around him. It was none other than Yishuan. The second god had moved at a surprisingly fast speed. But, Yi Zaiwen's speed wasn't too slow in comparison. He rushed forward and arrived in front of the second god. Yishuan, I didn't think that you'd dare to appear before me. The second god's eyes turned bloodshot as soon as he saw Yishuan. He shouted as he continued to stare at Yishuan. Come to die. I must take the revenge for the third, fourth, and the fifth brother, the second god spoke in a low voice. It seemed as if the faces and voices of the deceased third, fourth, and fifth god had appeared before his eyes. It aroused even more hatred for Yishuan in his heart. You're the same as those idiots. You're as eager to throw away your life. Yishuan replied. His eyes looked straight at the second god. They seemed motionlessly glued to him. The second god became even more furious after he heard this. He couldn't tolerate to hear Yishuan talk bad about his dead brothers. This was a huge insult to their name. It was simply unforgivable. The silence suddenly perished as the second god moved into action. Two greenish-black lights were emitted from his ice-cold pupil and rushed straight into the sky. His vision was firmly locked on Yishuan. He certainly didn't wish to allow Yishuan to escape at any cost. Then, he trod forward. The surrounding space bounced, and it was reduced to fragments. The second god swept out a cyan-colored sea of energy. It blotted out the sky and covered the earth as it swept towards Yishuan to engulf him. The world itself lost its color in the wake of such a terrifying attack. Most onlookers immediately retreated. They didn't dare to come close. They were afraid that the force of the aftermath would kill them. Yishuan refused to admit being the weaker one. So, he immediately rushed forward. An endless sea of golden divinities was unleashed in the forms of giant waves, and swept out towards the second god. Boom! The cyan sea of energy and the golden sea of divinities knocked against each other in the void. It appeared as if two gigantic oceans had collided in the sky. The surging waves of dreadful power were unleashed unto the surroundings after the collision. The two experts stepped upon those waves of energy, and arrived in front of each other. They could almost see each other's facial expressions. Die! The second god roared. The entire space collapsed around his body, and broke into small pieces. He discharged all his power, and it reached the pinnacle. He looked like the reincarnation of an ancient titan. His tyranny had reached the pinnacle. It was as if he was the ruler of this country, as if the entire world belonged to him. His lance swept down from the sky at a lightning speed like a long black snake. It shattered the space on the way as it arrived in front of Yishuan. However, Yi Zaiwen's extremely terrifying sword intention soared into the sky, and formed an incomparably huge sword intention. He gave a loud shout, and the golden divinities throughout his body began to surge. Then, the sword intention fell downwards. Bang! The lance and the sword intention ferociously collided in the void. A big section of the sky collapsed and turned into fine powder. The pitch-dark surface of the universe was revealed in the aftermath of this collision. The chaotic energy had started to boil on the other side. In fact, some of it leaked out and split open the nearby space. The first collision between them had turned out to be very stunning. The two of them retreated several steps. Both individuals seemed somewhat amazed by each other's power. Yishuan and the second god were in good condition. Their bodies were their biggest defense. They had never come across any expert with a physique that could rival theirs. Yet, they didn't feel surprised, nor were sympathetic for each other. On the contrary, a fiercer killing intention as well as fighting intention scattered in all directions. Chapter 397. There was no scope of sympathy here. Rather, it was inappropriate in this situation since these two opponents only had the desire to kill. Your gilded body is worthless. It'll kill you like a dog, the second god squinted as he spoke coldly. His eyes shone and emitted a sharp beam. This beam almost condensed into a solid beam of light. It could frighten a person's soul. It's ridiculous to compare your gilded body with my Titan body. The speed of the lance didn't decrease. It transformed into a black snake, and set off an incomparably powerful and terrifying aura. It pierced the void, and the sky got shattered into pieces as it rushed towards Yishuan. Clang! Yi Zaiwen's sword intention condensed into a long sword in his hand. Buried earth sword. The sharp sword beam sent out an incomparably frightening force. A long dragon was unleashed, and it moved forward to face the incoming attack. Bang! Horrifying waves of energy were swept out from both sides. The energy waves swept across crazily in the surroundings, and made cracks in the void. The two experts clashed in midair. They were trying their best to not affect the true martial university, as much as possible. Otherwise, the one to survive the battle would have to face the criticism of the high-level experts. Your Titan body is also worthless. The so-called Titan god race has nothing more than an undeserved reputation. Yishuan replied coldly. You started to clamor about challenging me only after you broke through to the semi-sage realm. That clearly shows that your cowardice, and also your lack of confidence in your Titan body. Your Titan body is nothing but a joke. I would have crushed you like an ant if we were in same realm. Yishuan had spoken this very calmly, as if this matter wasn't even related to him. The crowd heard this, and was sent in an uproar. He had dared to speak such insulting words in front of the Titan guy. No other Heaven's Pride level expert would have dared to speak such words. In fact, no one would have believed these words even if a Heaven's Pride level expert had dared to say such boasting words about being superior to the Titan body. However, some people had believed in Yi Zaiwen's words. They didn't know whether any of the other Heaven's Pride level experts had reached the semi-sage realm or not. But, they knew that Yishuan hadn't. In fact, Yishuan hadn't even reached the half-step Legendary's Great Complete Realm yet. To say that I could have crushed you like ant if we were in same realm, perhaps wasn't just boasting. Yishuan was merely at half-step Legendary 9th stage. However, he could easily suppress an ordinary expert of the semi-sage realm. He would become far more dreadful once he had advanced to the semi-sage realm. Saying that he would kill him like an ant clearly showed his confidence and boldness. This was the reason why the other Heaven's Pride level experts hadn't dared to look down on Yishuan even though he was at a lower level compared to them. In fact, some people even considered him as the strongest Heaven's Pride level expert. This was because he was still at a lower level. No one among his peers would be able to suppress him once his level would match theirs. Of course, one must also consider the fact that Yishuan was making a constant progress. However, the others were also making progress, and it wouldn't be easy to surpass them. Ha 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 ha, the second god looked upwards and laughed out loud. The killing intention in his eyes had turned even more intense. He was always aware that Yishuan was a threat. So, he had decided to wait and gain confidence by having a breakthrough to the semi-sage realm before he set out to kill Yishuan. That was because he knew that Yi Zaiwen's cultivation would be lower than his own by several levels once he had made the breakthrough to the semi-sage realm. So, it would be impossible for Yishuan to catch up with him in such a short time. Perhaps, Yishuan could jump several levels within the legendary realm, but he wouldn't stand a chance against him once he had stepped into the semi-sage realm. How could the sage word be taken lightly? Jumping level didn't mean much at a later phase because the key point was to condense principles. Otherwise, the fighting strength would remain stuck. However, he hadn't anticipated that he had made a massive miscalculation. He was sure that his plan was foolproof, and figured that he was absolutely safe. However, he found out that he had made a blunder after the fight started. Yishuan was far more powerful than he had imagined. The killing intention frantically surged up inside his heart because Yishuan always turned out to be contrary to his expectations. Therefore, he desperately wanted to strangle Yishuan in the cradle this time. Several people exclaimed in amazement. The combat between these two individuals had indeed turned out to be a fierce struggle between two evenly matched giants. Neither of the two was ordinary. The second god emitted cyan-colored rays of light from his body. These rays of light began to boil. The sound of his loud shout proliferated far, far away in all direction, and shattered the heaven and earth. It was an exceptionally terrifying scene. The second god had taken the initiative and attacked. He advanced with large strides. It seemed as if his steps were shattering the void to pieces. He looked unusually brilliant as his cyan-colored figure dashed about. His massive imposing aura seemed like a huge mountain as it advanced towards Yi Shiwen to kill him. Yi Zaiwen's countenance turned serious. He had said that he could kill that Titan guy like an ant if they were in the same realm. However, he mustn't spare any effort since they weren't in same realm at present. Moreover, he didn't have much of an advantage of having a superior physique like always since the Titan guy also had an invincible body, and an outstanding one at that. One, which had been famous since ancient times. He shouted loudly. The golden divinities surged up within his body. Then, the divinities swept out in the sky, and wrapped around Yi Zaiwen's entire body. Yi Shiwen brandished his long sword with a clang. He issued a sword beam. And, it seemed as if the universe itself would collapse at any moment. The energy swept across in all directions, as if to sweep away the entire world. The sword attack took the shape of a sword dragon, and rushed forward. Bang! The sound of the explosion resembled the collapse of a galaxy. The space got distorted, it then cracked open with a loud explosion. Then, the chaos leaked out from the crack. This was purely a collision of bodies, and not skills. This frightened the spectators even further. Their strong bodies were the biggest assets these two individuals had in their arsenal. They were colliding ferociously, and these clashes were setting off frightening shock waves of unimaginable proportions. These shock waves could crush anything that stood in their path. They were wreaking havoc by launching such vast attacks, they hadn't even used any exquisite martial arts yet. In fact, each of their attacks was 10 times more powerful as any martial art-based attack. In other words, they could merely use their physical abilities to crush 10 martial art attacks at once. A clash with these two would be disastrous for the experts of the same realm. That was because their attacks wouldn't work on those two. An ordinary attack couldn't even sway them. So, inflicting injuries to them would be simply out of the question. Yi Zaiwen's body had left many people in shock. Yi Shiwen was well known as Golden War God. However, nobody knew what kind of physique he possessed in reality. It seemed that there was no information about such a physique even among the well-known tough physiques. The Titan body had an outstanding reputation since ancient times. However, for some reason, Yi Zaiwen's body hadn't fallen into a disadvantageous position while competing with the Titan body. This had stunned countless people. Yi Shiwen faintly felt that his arms had turned somewhat numb. This was the first time he had come across such a tough opponent. He remembered that the legends that had said that the Titan god enjoyed great reputation for possessing an incredibly strong body and strength enough to lift a mountain without any problem. The second god was also amazed by Yi Shiwen. He hadn't anticipated that Yi Shiwen would be able to resist his strongest blow. This was collision of bodies, but the most important point to note was that Yi Shiwen also possessed extremely huge strength. The second god had the Titan body. His body was naturally going to be strong. But, what kind of a body did Yi Shiwen have? Could it be that he possessed the bloodline of some ancient devil god? He quickly searched through the names of several ancient devil gods in his mind. However, he didn't find any similarity between any one of them and Yi Shiwen. However, he didn't have much time to think due to the criticality of this juncture. He sneered and said, "I don't know what kind of physique you possess. However, it was the biggest mistake of your life to provoke me." Yi Shiwen coldly looked at the second god. He smiled and replied, "I guess that you only find your own physique to be worthy of a mention. But, your Titan body is crap in my eyes." Even if the Titan god were to stand before me, I would tear him apart with my hands. Yi Zaiwen's hair was flying in the air. His eyes were as sharp as knives. His fighting intention was boiling. He wasn't merely talking big. A practitioner could easily tear apart the gods and devils with their hands once the tyrant body technique had been practiced to the highest layer. Even the Titan god wouldn't be a big deal. Yi Shiwen was extremely confident that even the real gods and devils wouldn't stand a chance against his tyrant body, let alone someone human who possessed their blood. The people in the surroundings started to gawk at this. What was Yi Shiwen trying to say? Did he mean that the Titan body wasn't an extraordinary physique? Countless people felt their eyes popping out at this revelation. The physique of an ordinary person couldn't be compared with those special physiques as far as they were concerned. The special physiques might have some weaknesses, but they were certainly stronger when compared to the physiques of ordinary people. Otherwise, they wouldn't have been regarded as special physiques in the first place. Moreover, the Titan body was the most famous of all the well-known special physiques. Those with special physique basically had invincible bodies. So, it was even more shocking if Yi Shiwen didn't possess some special physique, since that would mean that a person with an ordinary physique had been able to last this long in a fight against the second god. Nobody would believe this. Perhaps, Yi Shiwen had practiced some kind of an extraordinary body tempering technique. This wasn't impossible. Not every ancient sage had possessed special physiques or some incredible bloodline. Rather, some outstanding geniuses had founded various kinds of body tempering techniques. And, the practice of these techniques could enable one to challenge the gods and devils. This wasn't false. However, those power techniques had disappeared in the ancient times. And, there were hardly any such invincible power techniques left now. You're extremely arrogant and ignorant. The second god sneered. Yi Shiwen was fearless because of his ignorance in his opinion. The Titan god had an illustrious prestige. In fact, he still enjoyed the name of a fierce god. However, Yi Shiwen had dared to say such demeaning things about him. That itself showed that he was fearless. "I'll send a heretic like you on your way to hell," the second god sneered and said. Bang! The second god trod forward. The sky itself fragmented due to the impact. He released an imposing aura, as if to prove that he held the superior monotheistic. Cyan-colored energy waves blotted out the sky and covered the earth as they swept towards Yi Shiwen. Yi Shiwen grasped his long sword, and countered the incoming attack. Yi Shiwen displayed a remarkable sword skill. It seemed as if he was a sword cultivator. My single sword move can unleash 10,000 principles. His real elemental energy no longer fluctuated on his body alone, it rushed ahead. The long sword in his hand was made of condensed sword intention. It darted out with a swoosh. Bang! Yi Zaiwen's longsword transformed into a sword dragon. It pierced through the cyan-colored energy waves in a flash. It then drilled its way into the waves, and rushed inside. Chapter 398. Yi Shiwen wasn't unfamiliar with the sword cultivation power techniques. In fact, the buried sword's secret was a supreme sword cultivation power technique. One's strength could level up to an incredible extent if it was comprehended to its fullest potential. The sword cultivation power techniques had always been known to possess superb attack power. However, Yi Shiwen hadn't used them. He had certainly experienced quick advancement as far as his sword cultivation was concerned. But, it had been too quick. He had indeed witnessed a sharp rise in his sword cultivation, but it had been difficult to lay a solid foundation. Yi Shiwen must walk on the road of martial arts. And, sword art was merely a part of martial arts. This was the reason why Yi Shiwen always followed the norm of preferring martial arts over sword arts. However, it was an undeniable fact that sword cultivation was superior in terms of attack power. Yi Shiwen unleashed the sword skills against his enemy. The long sword pierced through the cyan-colored energy waves, and arrived in front of the second god. Yi Shiwen had only brandished his long sword, nothing else. Bang! the most terrifying collision took place. It was a startling clash between Yi Zaiwen's long sword and second god's lance. Endless divine beams were emitted in a flash. Their weapons had collided, and this collision had produced incredible rays of light. A frightening figure emerged from the lance. It was a very tall figure. It seemed as if it was the tallest figure in the world. It was the giant phantom of an ancient titan. It was extremely horrifying. He held a long and incredible lance in his hand. It was emitting incredible divine beams. These beams pierced the vast sky, and swept down towards Yi Shiwen to stab him. Yi Zaiwen's eyes flashed brightly. That lance had a fragment of the ancient titan's soul inside it. It had been resurrected from the lance. Its incomparably dreadful aura firmly locked on Yi Shiwen. The murderous aura was swept out. It was as scary as its mentions in the legends. This lance had been the weapon of an ancient titan. It was certainly half broken. However, it contained the conscious soul fragment of an ancient titan. The second god had used his titan blood to stimulate the lance, and that had led to the ancient titan's resurrection. Clang! Yi Zaiwen's long sword released an incredible sword intention, and it rushed straight into the sky. The sword intention condensed and took the shape of an old man in the void. It was the figure of that strong sword expert whom Yi Shiwen had earlier seen. He held a long sword, very tightly at that. His sleeves were fluttering about. He carried an aura so imposing that it seemed as if he was looking down on the world. His eyes seemed as sharp as a sword. The world has no choice but to follow my way. The Tao principles of the world swept out along with the incredible rays of light emitted by that sword expert. The sword expert suppressed all other Tao principles. Everyone had a scare, apprehensive feelings had started to rise in their hearts. They felt as if they had no choice but to submit to this sword expert, and follow his invincible path. This was an invincible path. Everyone had to walk alone on this path. And to do so, they couldn't walk on their ordinary cultivation route. Not to mention that they would have to start their cultivation on this path from the beginning. That ancient titan figure had once suppressed the entire universe of gods with his power. However, no one knew that the sword expert was a great personality of the ancient era. He had never shown any signs of weakness. He would merely use his world-crushing sword to destroy his enemies' martial ways. The two extremely terrifying and ancient forces ferociously collided in the void. Their powers began to boil together. Both of them were utilizing the power of principles. The surrounding experts of the younger generation were covered in cold sweat. What kind of terrifying power was this? Both of these individuals were ranked as Heaven's Pride level experts. However, many people hadn't been convinced of that. After all, these experts themselves were geniuses from different regions. They couldn't have entered the true martial university otherwise. There were many inner disciples present among them as well. However, they didn't have any choice but to admit that those two were extremely formidable after they had witnessed their terrifying powers. Was it even possible for a semi-sage expert to discharge such power? This kind of an attack would be too exaggerated for a sage expert, even for a senior sage expert. In fact, this wasn't just pure strength. Perhaps, these two would be lacking when compared with sage expert on the basis on strength alone. However, an ordinary sage realm expert wouldn't come close to them when one would take the level of this battle into account. It could be said that these two individuals had grasped some incredible secret techniques. Both of them had come across unimaginable fortuitous encounters. The onlookers learnt this as they witnessed the wills of these two men collide so fiercely in the void. Clang! 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 The lance and the long sword collided countless times in a split second. The Titan lance contained extraordinary strength. It vigorously smashed the vast sky into pieces. That old sword expert's long sword was incomparably sharp. And, he cut open the vast sky with just his long sword, nothing else. The confrontation between these two had surpassed everyone's imagination. It was like the confrontation between two mythical characters. one of them was merely a leftover wisp of soul. It wasn't as scary as the real thing. And, the other was a simulation based on Yi Zaiwen's experience. Yi Shiwen had started to question the origins of the mysterious space. That was because his mysterious space had managed to simulate the three elements, essence, energy, and soul to mold the clone of the sword expert. And, this clone was almost like the real one. The strength of the simulated clone was certainly far below that of the old sword expert. However, it was still very dreadful. Everyone looked stupefied. The powers of those two weren't that terrifying. However, the spectators could easily make out the exquisiteness of the martial arts being employed during the battle. They were looking at the battle between those two giant phantoms, and felt as if they were witnessing a battle between two Tao principles. The two phantoms certainly didn't have living consciousness. However, their pure and unadulterated fighting spirit had made everyone even more dumbstruck. It took long to describe the whole thing, but everything happened in a short period of time. And, these giant phantoms had already exchanged more than 1,000 blows in this short time. Almost nobody was able to see the exact number of blows that were exchanged between them. Such power had surpassed everyone's imagination. But, the loss of control over the phantoms was also apparent. Yi Shiwen felt that the old sword expert had nearly gone out of his control. It was as if the old sword expert had been awakened by the insane fighting intention of that titan. It seemed as if a trace of consciousness was still left in the sword intention. And, it seemed as if it had been aroused due to the collision with this fierce opponent. Bang! The two giant figures ferociously collided, and then collapsed into pieces. Countless collisions had taken place by this time. That had left the two giant phantoms covered in various kinds of cracks. And, this final collision had shattered them. Yi Shiwen and the second god rushed towards each other to kill. There was no trace of hesitation in their actions. The lance and the long sword streamed across the horizon, and went towards their targets. Puff! Puff! Blood splashed, and broken bone fragments were sent swirling in the air. Both of them staggered and dropped down since they had sustained terrible injuries. The lance had opened a huge hole in Yi Zaiwen's stomach. The cyan-colored energy was crazily devouring Yi Zaiwen's wound. Else, he would have recovered instantly. The second god had also sustained a serious wound. The wound had gone down to his bones. His bones could be seen from the wound's opening. He was cut from the shoulder, and down to his stomach. It was obvious that this sword attack could have cleft him in two. However, that hadn't happened, thanks to his tough titan body. His body was just like a titan's. Even so, this injury had turned his complexion pale. After all, he had nearly been split into two. Countless surrounding disciples were in shock. They felt their hearts tremble. They hadn't anticipated that these two would end up wounding each other in this first ever head-on collision. These two individuals with incredible bodies had finally entered the stage of melee-style fighting. They wouldn't be drenched in blood if this were only a practice match for exchanging pointers. However, these two were engaged in a vicious battle. Yi Zaiwen's long sword had almost cleft the second god into two. And, the second god's lance had nearly stabbed Yi Zaiwen's heart. They weren't holding back, not one bit. These were precisely the so-called move of life or death. A couple of ordinary individuals wouldn't have survived if they were to exchange places with these two. One individual would have been stabbed to death. And, the other individual would have been split into two halves. Both individuals would have died together. Even a minor difference of strength between two experts can decide the victor of the fight. However, these two apparently had same strength. They both stood at the peak of the initial stage of semi-sage realm. Moreover, the most important thing was that they had extremely tough bodies. Any other opponent would get killed in just one move when faced with either of these two. However, these two had merely sustained severe injuries when pit against each other. Not to mention that these injuries hadn't affected their vitality. If someone had dared to replace these two individuals, they would have died long ago. I didn't expect that the Titan guy would sustain injuries. This must be the first time he has suffered a loss. I've never heard of him getting injured before. He always relies on his invincible body to bully others. He has finally suffered a loss this time. That Yishuan is abnormally strong. He doesn't seem to claim that he possessed some special physique. Don't tell me he has obtained the body tempering technique of some ancient sage. They had guessed it correctly. However, they didn't know that Yishuan had only obtained the first layer of tyrant body technique. He had patched the rest by himself. He had created his own technique to suit his needs. He hadn't relied on the ancient sage alone. Yishuan took the initiative and began to recover. He used his own energy to expel the cyan color foreign energy that surrounded his wound. Then, he began to operate the Phoenix regeneration technique, and started to repair his wound. Afterwards, he looked coldly at the second god, and rushed towards him again. The long sword in his hand transformed into a long dragon, and swept down. The second god didn't get much time to think. He could only brandish his lance to defend himself. Bang! Yizaiwen's long sword bombarded waves of incomparably terrifying force. They struck the second god, and sent him flying for a few meters. He was indeed sent flying for only a few meters. However, he had already fallen into a disadvantageous position. His Titan body did recover quite quickly. But, it couldn't possibly match the regeneration speed of Yizaiwen's Phoenix regeneration technique. Yishuan was continuously maintaining himself at his peak condition. Meanwhile, the second god's condition was getting more and more serious with every passing moment. He had been slowly suppressed and pushed into a disadvantageous position by Yishuan. Chapter 399. In a fight between experts, even a small disparity between the contenders could create a huge difference. Yizaiwen's strength was dependent on his healing ability, and it was far more formidable than that of the second god. This small disparity was enough for Yishuan to slowly and gradually suppress the second god. Yishuan consistently maintained himself at his peak condition. The second god also possessed an outstanding secret healing technique as well. Moreover, his Titan body itself was extremely strong. However, he couldn't possibly be placed on par with Yishuan. I hadn't thought that the Titan guy would fall into the disadvantageous position. Yeah. It's very difficult to tell who's got the stronger body and who's got the weaker one. The disparity between their physiques isn't clear. But, there is huge difference between their healing powers. Yizaiwen's healing technique simply goes against the heaven's will. It's indeed incredible. The Titan guy was very aggressive in the beginning. He was the one who came to cause trouble for Yishuan. He wanted to kill Yishuan. But, the outcome has finally turned out to be like this. Everyone discussed as the battle continued. The second god looked coldly at Yishuan. Blood was dripping from his chest. Yizaiwen's sword had repeatedly struck his body. Even his Titan body couldn't endure such attacks. He heard everyone's comments about him, but he had disregarded them. He had indeed been suppressed. However, he was far from being in danger as suspected by the others. After all, both of them had sustained similar injuries. It was just that one individual recovered quicker than the other. However, these secret healing techniques had a common characteristic. It was to hurt one's vitality in order to restore one's injuries faster, especially when the wounds were serious. After all, these techniques went against the heaven's will. So, they had to come with a heavy price in exchange of accelerated recovery. Yishuan, you're very strong. But, you can only become a nameless skeleton in my path to invincibility. The second god's countenance turned ice cold. The wounds on his body unexpectedly began to transform into scars. Bang! The second god's imposing aura instantly changed, very significantly. A dark green cyclone began to revolve around his body. The metal rings worn on his arms and ankles began to rotate as his stature increased by a section. The second god had never revealed his secret true Titan body, the one that had been mentioned in the legends. This was the first time he had revealed it. He had previously seen Yishuan as a formidable opponent. But, Yishuan had turned out to be even more formidable an opponent than he had imagined. His killing intention began to burn even stronger. His path to invincibility would become clearer if he could kill this super formidable opponent. Yishuan, be careful. He's transforming into a Titan. Yi-Mo warned Yishuan. His strength will increase by leaps and bounds after he transforms into a Titan. Yishuan nodded. He was standing in the sky with the long sword in his hand. He was blankly looking at the second god. He trampled the void as he fiercely trod forward, and arrived in front of the second god. Yi Zaiwen's sharp sword had cut open the vast sky. His killing intention had spread all around. The many spectating disciples of the true martial university were left in utter shock as they watched from afar. They could feel the astonishing killing intention that was coming out from his long sword. Then, they looked at the second god. His strength had increased by a layer after he had completed his transformation into the real Titan body. This left them dumbstruck. These two individuals were going against the heaven's will. The second god sneered. He grasped the cold black lance and rushed out. His imposing aura had become more powerful than before. This was indeed the real Titan body. All the heavenly races had been shaken by its power at one point in time. His left hand rose in the sky. It grasped a bunch of strong winds and lightning from inside the void. And then, he thrust them towards Yishuan. The winds and lightning blotted out the sky as they rolled towards Yishuan to crush him. These exceptionally terrifying winds and lightning could strangle a truth-level expert to death. An ordinary legendary expert would be seriously injured by their force. Gales and lightning were like pets for Titans. It seemed as if the god of gales and lightning was watching over this fight from above as the second god continuously chanted some sutras. Bang! The gales and lightning swept down towards Yishuan. The dreadful wind pressed down upon Yishuan to crush him. This mixture of gales and lightning was like a grindstone that had advanced to grind Yishuan to death. Yishuan sneered. The thunder and lightning carried the strong positive power of the world. But, he wasn't afraid of the power of lightning, nor did he feel restrained in the face of it. Could these thunders and lightning be more formidable than the energies unleashed by the heavenly tribulation? Yi Zaiwen's left hand transformed into a heavenly big hand. It stretched out, as if to grab something. Yishuan grabbed those gales and lightning. Then, he began to operate the tyrant body technique and absorbed them in their entirety. This was the strongest ability of the tyrant body technique. It could absorb all energies, regardless of its type. It didn't follow the way of a benevolent king who would accept any and all. Rather, it was a tyrant who knew only domination. Yishuan had just finished absorbing that energy. But, he saw a startling and black divine beam just then. And, it had already arrived in front of him. The space in front had collapsed, and had been broken into small pieces. He was still fearless. The long sword danced in his hand as he swept out a world-shaking aura. Yishuan had used the buried heaven sword, and that too for the first time. Nobody among his peers had been able to compel him to use the buried heaven sword. The use of this attack against the experts of older generation would have been pointless since they possessed far more tyrannical strength than Yishuan. The incomparably aggressive sword power swept down. It shattered the space, and the chaos leaked out. It seemed as if this sword would bury the heavens, restart the age of chaos, and open the pathway for a brand new world. The buried heaven sword displayed infinite power in Yi Zaiwen's hands. Yi Zaiwen's offensive had grown much more potent than before. His attack, and that long lance, collided ferociously. They came in contact, but soon moved away. Then, the lances and the sword's tip rushed towards their respective targets. However, the spot where the collision had taken place collapsed and broke down into pieces. A huge force swept across the surroundings, and even the void caved in. Everyone was dumbstruck by this spectacle. This fight had reached a mind-boggling level. Bang! A giant explosion took place. A figure went flying upside down. Blood dripped from his body and spilled in the sky. Everyone looked closely. It turned out to be Yi Shiwen. The second god's strength had increased significantly after he had revealed his real Titan body. The evenly matched fight had suddenly transformed, and Yi Shiwen had fallen into disadvantageous situation. The second god pursued after Yi Shiwen with strides as mighty as that of a tiger or a dragon. His lance swept down straight towards Yi Shiwen. It rampaged forward like a long dragon. It seemed as if it would destroy the entire world. Bang! Yi Shiwen firmly blocked the second god's attack. Yi Shiwen, you are done for. Obediently accept your death. The second god's countenance turned sinister as he spoke. The thought that he would kill Yi Shiwen had made him happy. Everyone's hearts began to beat ferociously. Could it be that Yi Shiwen would be killed? Yi Shiwen had fallen into disadvantageous position. He had merely relied on his excellent recovering ability to gain advantage over his opponent. But, that advantage had disappeared after the emergence of the second god's real Titan body. The onlookers couldn't help but sigh with emotion. The special physiques had been famous in the entire world for countless years, and it wasn't without reason. They always possessed a concealed advantage that an ordinary person couldn't match. They could easily achieve the level of proficiency an ordinary person couldn't in their entire lifetime. Not to mention that the prestige of Titan bloodline had suppressed the entire world for countless years. However, Yi Shiwen clearly didn't have such an advantage. This was his biggest disadvantage in this fight. Therefore, he had fallen into disadvantageous position. Countless people were worried for Yi Shiwen. Yet, he was very calm for some reason. His expression didn't change one bit. The look in his eyes got more and more profound on the contrary. In fact, there wasn't a single trace of anxiety in his heart. These special physiques were outstanding. The second god had changed entirely after his Bodhist transformation. He had been beaten and suppressed by Yi Shiwen in the beginning. However, he had started to suppress Yi Shiwen now. This massive transformation couldn't be described in words. However, Yi Shiwen didn't lose heart. He had willingly chosen this path. He was on an expedition to fight and kill his way to the top. He had been in such thrilling fights several times. He had gotten so used to it that his heart was as honed as a solid rock. Most importantly, Yi Shiwen had understood that it must have been extremely difficult to exhibit the real Titan body. It was similar to any other secret technique, and would eventually get used up. After all, the second god merely possessed the Titan's blood. He wasn't a real Titan. Therefore, this transformation would end once his real Titan body got exhausted. However, this battle would still be a difficult one even if Yi Shiwen clearly understood this fact. The second god's moves had caused serious injuries to him after the transformation had taken place. After all, there was a big difference between their levels. Yi Shiwen would still have been able to suppress him by merely raising his hand if they were at the same level, same realm, despite the body transformation. An average person might not have been able to last this long if they were in Yi Shiwen's place and were to unceasingly sustain such serious injuries. In fact, they would have perished in 5 moves or less. The terrifying power of the Titan blood had been exposed in its entirety. However, Yi Shiwen had the Phoenix regeneration technique. It had maintained him at his peak condition. The only way to kill Yi Shiwen was to kill him with a sudden explosion, since it wouldn't give him a chance to regenerate. Otherwise, he wouldn't be able to kill Yi Shiwen. Time passed, second after second, minute after minute. Yi Shiwen sustained severe injuries again and again, but he managed to recover quickly each time. The second god had started to get anxious. Just as Yi Shiwen had speculated, it was impossible for him to maintain this real Titan body for long. After all, he wasn't a real Titan. Things would turn out very badly for him if he couldn't kill Yi Shiwen before he exhausted his advanced form. Roar! The second god roared. The lance swept out and penetrated the blue sky. The world suddenly lost its color, and the sky turned pitch black. Bang! Yi Zaiwen's long sword welcomed the incoming attack, but couldn't block it. He was again sent flying upside down. He spouted blood, and the bones throughout his body got shattered. The second god was about to proceed to kill Yi Shiwen. But suddenly, the earth and the sky began to shake frantically. The sky disintegrated, and two suffocating dreadful auras swept down from above. A person's figure came flying down, and spouted a mouthful of blood. Everyone exclaimed because they had seen that person before. It turned out to be Bai Jian Song. He had sustained severe injuries all over his body. Another figure came chasing after. It was the senior elder of the Clear Sky Peak. Both of them had sustained serious injuries. However, his condition was much better than that of Bai Jian Song. However, he appeared to be in a distressed situation as well. His complexion was pale. He was at the peak level of the Great Sage realm. Yet, he had been reduced to such a distressed state by Bai Jian Song, a man who had stepped into the initial stage of the Great Sage realm only recently. You're tuning in to the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.